A long time ago, the fairies were a powerful magical race, powerful enough to vie with wizards for leadership of the magic world. But as history marched on, humanity's rise was unstoppable. When the magic world was still intertwined with mundane society, human prosperity inevitably shaped the magical community. As humans grew stronger, so did wizards. More than 2,000 years ago, wizards seized undisputed leadership of the magic world. In the language of the East, it could be said, the great rise of humankind is destiny, and other magical races had to accept a lesser place. Human numbers swelled, they spread across the globe, and many magical peoples found fewer places to hide. It wasn't until the Statute of Secrecy, enacted 3 centuries ago, that the magic world formally separated itself from Muggles. The statute aimed to preserve an independent space for magical beings by keeping them from exposure. But in practice, it tightened wizards' hold on authority. Other magical races were legally forced into hiding and made to rely on the protection and administration of wizards. For most small races, that was an inconvenience they could tolerate. The fairies were different. After their overall decline in power, the fairies never accepted their reduced station. Small acts of rebellion became a tradition. Decades before the statute, in 1612, British fairies rose up near Hogsmeade. The Three Broomsticks Inn had once served as a communication hub for wizards. After the statute's promulgation in 1692, another small rebellion flared in 1752, and that one mismanaged into near civil war among the British magical community, forcing the Minister of Magic to resign. The next minister lasted only 2 months before resigning in disgrace when the fairies allied with werewolves and dramatically increased their strength. The leader of that uprising, Rags Lalla, even earned a spot on chocolate frog cards. The most recent fairy rebellion came in 1865. After it, the British Ministry of Magic compromised in an attempt to avoid further unrest. Gringotts in Britain was handed entirely to the fairies. Elsewhere in the world, wizards still largely controlled their national banks, but in Britain, fairies ran almost every branch. 90% of staff were fairies. Only a handful of positions were held by wizards. For the first time, a major chain bank in the magic world was under non-human control. The ministry hoped controlling the flow of money would placate them, but the fairies' ambition was not so easily sated. As holders of most of the British magical world's banking, the majority of wizards' deposits, and a large share of magical metal production and sales, the fairies grew disdainful of wizards. In recent years, with the influx of otherworldly magical races, they grew bolder, quietly recruiting muscle like hill giants and ogres, and their strength surged. Ted watched all this and felt the inevitability of another uprising. The fairies had a habit of rebelling every generation. It had been more than 100 years since the last one. He could not stand by. He distrusted Cornelius Fudge and suspected the minister might be scheming to use any unrest to his political advantage in an election year. Ted contacted Barty and laid out what he'd found. The fairies were accumulating power and preparing to rebel, and Fudge might be in contact with them for his own ends. Barty seized the chance to infiltrate. This year was Fudge's last in office, and the ministry elections were upcoming. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was rising as the most popular candidate. She had the prestige and moral weight to unseat Fudge. If Fudge lost, he might try anything. Ted knew what to ask next. Were there any capable subordinates of Fudge who could interfere? Barty replied immediately. Robert Caubsey, deputy head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, had been promoted by Fudge to counterbalance Amelia Bones and had influence in the Auror office. He was Fudge's most effective inside man. Ted told Barty to feed him Caubsey's movements and let Ted handle it. Barty, eager, declared he'd fill the vacancy and become Fudge's reliable assistant. Ted also rang Lucius Malfoy. Lucius was less sanguine than Barty when he heard Fudge might be involved. Ted suggested Lucius bring Draco in, his training had matured, and quietly involve Sirius and other pureblood families to build a counterweight. Pureblood alliances still held power. In a small society of 30,000 magical people, consolidating influence with old families could provide a rapid response during unrest. Lucius understood the temptation. It was almost dawn by the time Ted decided to neutralize Caubsey. He apparated to a familiar street in an assumed form, an older bearded wizard, and infiltrated Kaubzi's home. Kaubzi had auror instincts, double-trigger wards, hidden alarms. But Ted's methods now used direct mental access and mirror space manipulation, and Kaubzi's defenses were child's play. 30 seconds later, Ted had him subdued. "Who are you? What do you want?" Kaubzi demanded as an invisible mental grip lifted him by the throat and left him kicking helplessly. Ted offered no explanation. He sent Kaubzi into the ideal land, the virtual world he controlled, sealed his memory with a backdoor suggestion, and left a trace to make the break-in look like the work of a dark wizard. Kaubzi had known only that Fudge planned something out of line to secure political advantage, and that Fudge had offered him the promise of promotion if things went wrong, but he had not been entrusted with deeper conspiracies. There was no point killing him. The magic world's population was small, and wasting a life solved nothing. Better to keep him as a malleable asset for later. And, if needed, Ted could always give him an NPC wife in the game and see how he reacted. Ted thought of it as a kind of psychological experiment. Next, the Goblin Wand Factory. Wands are the magic world's finest tool. Magic runs on will, but will is unstable. Wands act as stabilizers, focusers, magic's remote control. Before wands, spellcasting was crude and error-prone. The invention of the wand changed everything. Wands extended the scope of magic and were decisive in many conflicts. Goblin rebellions had faltered in part because the goblins lacked access to wands. Only a tiny elite rare few could ever match wizards without them. So wands became heavily protected and taboo. Goblins were forbidden to handle them, and wand-making remained an almost exclusively wizard craft. Fewer than 100 wizards in Europe could make wands. Some countries kept the technique in a single family line for generations. Finished wands had to be registered with the local ministry, much like muggles regulating weapons. Goblins wanted wands, but their avenues were limited, usually confiscation from dead wizards. Then, with the recent Otherworld upheavals, an unexpected opportunity appeared. Goblins had obtained an enchanting treatise from another world, Azeroth, and after spending vast resources and conducting costly divinations to decode it, they found a low-level method for producing wands. The result wasn't Ollivander quality, but it was workable. They poured money and resources into experimenting with materials and set up production. Ted was not surprised to find some of his own Otherworld knowledge had made its way into this process. He had imported alchemical and enchanting knowledge from Azeroth into his game world mechanics, partly to make wizardry playable. In the game, making a wand is part of a mandatory questline for magician classes. By level 20, a player can craft their wand if they complete the quest. Real-world replication is supposed to be nearly impossible from only in-game information, but the goblins had already invested heavily to leap that gap. In short, they leached off Ted's designs, and he was not pleased. He left a subtle mental backdoor in the mind of the gatekeeper goblin as a contingency, then slipped invisibly into the factory. It was massive and subterranean, 50 to 60 goblins working inside, 30 to 40 on guard. The factory itself sat on a gigantic drilling apparatus that could move underground, shifting location periodically to avoid detection. The goblins had literally hollowed out their workspace with a mobile, enchanted mining machine that had consumed decades of their magical metal reserves. It was, in a sense, their heritage, and worth keeping. Inside the production area, Ted found 8 actual wand makers, all wizened and experienced. Their output was not the work of individual artisans, but an assembly line. They could crank out 7 or 8 wands a day, far more than Ollivander's painstaking traditional methods. That quantity, even at average quality, was revolutionary for goblin forces. Ted subdued the leader and combed his memories. The rebellion had been in the making for over 20 years, dating back to the chaos of Voldemort's reign. The goblins had planned to strike when the wizards were weakened and demoralized. Voldemort's fall had come sooner than they expected and upset their timing, but the recent arrival of otherworld races had renewed their hope. They had formalized action now. They were not solely reliant on the wand factory. They had other preparations, and they had been in secret contact with Fudge, although the goblins did not truly trust him. Ted let that last point sit in his mind. Fudge's meddling made every faction vulnerable. Perhaps, Ted thought darkly, he could set them to turn on each other. Chapter 4-5. The Principal is Busy. Ted implanted a mind backdoor into every goblin working at the Wand Factory, registered them in Ideal Land, and began round-the-clock monitoring. He wanted to know their exact plans and what they were counting on. Wands would be only part of it. The goblins also maintained a 1,000-strong unit of interdimensional monsters, very fierce fighters. Ted had seen it in the goblin leader's mind. Two-headed ogres, orcs, hill giants, powerful creatures, many at level 8 or 9, some over 10, even elites. Keeping them fed alone was a massive expense. He'd also seen devices like a ruby headband spirit controller used to command magical mounts. Every skull in that auxiliary unit had one embedded, cleverly concealed. That suggested there were more than 1,000 monsters, also magical animals and beasts under control. Could there be more? 20 years of preparation, resources, manpower. There had to be supplies and contingency plans. The goblins' strategy after the uprising began would include smashing the ministry, seizing control of the British magical press, taking over the Owl Post and other communication channels. Ted also remembered the recent surge of MagicNet Utopia hackers. Had the sudden appearance of Ideal Land disrupted the old Magic World information networks and ruined goblin plans? Maybe they wanted Ideal Land. Of course, occupying it by force was technically impossible, and MagicNet Utopia had essentially been invented and propagated by Ted. If you can't fix the system, remove its creator. Could the goblins plan to eliminate him before launching their operation? Ted's intelligence and deductions were mostly right, but he still felt something was missing. Relying only on what he'd seen gave them a chance, but not a decisive edge. They had failed 3 rebellions already and paid for each one. They ought to have learned caution. A rebellion needs a thunderbolt, a decisive blow. Ted guessed they must have a trump, an ultimate weapon. He was projecting human, Western expectations onto goblins, and that was misleading. The goblins were a race with a long history of rebellions, beaten back in ancient Egypt, scattered by locals and Romans, expelled and wandering, yet always convinced of their own greatness and right to rule. Emotion and pride fueled repeated uprisings. Still, they weren't without resources. The goblins had another factory, a magic energy mech workshop. Ted had pioneered mech designs himself, and watching Ron pilot the first magic energy mech in the Triwizard tournament had inspired them. They hunted for information and, after discovering a treasure trove in Germany, managed to build similar but distinct mechs. These goblin mechs were simple versions of the standard constructs, low-grade by design but effective, and mass-produced using assembly lines, dwarf machine tools, and gnome-guided magic tech. They could churn out over 10 units a day. The cockpits were custom-made for goblins. Other races would have trouble fitting. The plan was predictable. Monster units draw fire up front, magic-proficient goblins use wands for mobility, and average goblins piloted the mechs as the main assault force. With built-in level 3 magic resistance, ordinary adult wizards' common spells were largely ineffective. Less common spells might do nothing. The mechs were fast, strong, capable of short bursts of charge, and mounted with magical weapons and defenses. Against inexperienced adult wizards, they were terrifying. Beyond manpower and machines, the goblins had another trump: their speed of action, and, crucially, a diviner of extraordinary power. For years, they'd been scooping up artifacts, raiding ruins, and arriving first on scenes where others lagged. People speculated they had a master of divination, and they did. In a lavishly protected secret cave in Ireland, built and maintained for a century, lay the central base of the goblin revivalists. Hundreds of goblins stood guard. At its core was an ancient diviner named Foyer, a shrunken, hunched old goblin under a meter-tall, skin and bone, white beard to his chest, bald on top, barely clinging to life with tubes and a high-end magic array sustaining him. Foyer, a survivor of the last Goblin Rebellion and older than Dumbledore, was a master prophet. His accurate divinations had allowed the goblins to act with uncanny speed and avoid disasters for decades. That changed when Ted arrived in the magic world. Foyer saw a young wizard in a dream who would destroy the goblins' hopes, almost wiping them out. The vision was blurry, and the goblins were still investigating. Had Ted not interfered, Foyer's experience might have pinned Ted down. But in Ted's second-year summer, while dealing with an otherworldly Jackalweir priest, Ted acquired a talent called Mist of Fate, Red. That talent effectively obscured his future in divinations. Anything involving even a little of Ted showed up as mist or blank. Later, when the Goblin archaeological team stumbled into Grindelwald's plot at the pyramid, Foyer's vision only showed the pyramid. Grindelwald redirected the goblins away. Foyer was now at death's door, and as diviners near the end, their sight sharpens. He'd seen the goblin race's future and concluded this was their last chance. If they missed this window, they'd never rise again. The senior goblin leadership decided, enough waiting. Generations had rebelled. They would rebel too. The plan was set in motion. Then there was Fudge. Since the Quidditch World Cup fiasco and his reckless Dragon Field enlightenment, he'd become a different politician, willing to gamble it all. With 2 months until the general election, Fudge knew stepping down quietly would mean exile and ruin. His enemies would tear him apart. He wanted re-election, no matter the cost. When he intercepted a mysterious compass with an eye-like background in the Department of Mysteries, it pointed him toward the Goblin Rebellion. He seized the chance. If wartime powers were invoked, a wartime order would supersede elections and essentially lock in his position. Whether the goblins succeeded didn't matter to him. He could turn on them later. For now, he needed the war. Fudge decided to secretly assist the goblins to manufacture a crisis that would save his career. Ted didn't know all of that, but he had more freedom and fewer formal ties. He had sources inside both the goblins and the ministry who could be nudged at the right moment. What he needed, though, was Dumbledore's backing. Acting alone might backfire. Dumbledore's support would legitimize any moves. So Ted contacted Dumbledore privately to report what he'd found. Dumbledore's reaction was oddly calm. After a pause, he said, "Ted, go find Moody. He will bring you to me." Ted was taken aback. A goblin rebellion and the Minister of Magic colluding with the goblins. Did Dumbledore hear him? Moody's house was a fortress of paranoid defenses, 7 or 8 wards and devices in the small yard. Moody himself barked, "Boy, what do you want?" His magical eye rolled and scanned, but strangely, it couldn't detect the magical aura on Ted. To the eye, Ted looked like an ordinary muggle. Ted, who'd become famous enough even off the web, found that odd. "Dumbledore told me to have you bring me to him," he said. Moody froze. "You're not lying? Don't waste my time." In the end, Moody took him, by a special portkey, to a mountaintop. They had landed high enough to be among the clouds, snow visible on distant slopes. "Don't look around," Moody said. "This is the Alps." Moody had chosen not to apparate, probably because the destination barred spatial transfer. Watching Moody limp up the slopes on a prosthetic leg made Ted uneasy, so he produced a bamboo copter. "Try this, Mr. Moody." Moody scoffed, then took it, immediately enchanted. "How much is it? Sell me one." "It's a gift," Ted said. No one could refuse a bamboo copter, Moody included. Flying in one cut their travel time drastically. After 7 or 8 minutes, the mood shifted. The sound of battle reached them, fierce and close. "Ted, as you can see, things are worse than they look, and I can't leave. I have to rely on you," Dumbledore said. Back at Hogwarts, Ted couldn't stop thinking about how serious Dumbledore's situation was. It seemed he had to take the lead. Hermione was relieved to see him. "You're finally back. That old toad Umbridge has asked about you several times. She's gotten really bold. She even suspended Hagrid and Trelawney's classes." Ted nodded. "Don't worry, she's not the main problem right now. Gather Harry, Neville, and the others. I have something to tell you. Harry, contact Sirius. I need to meet him and Lupin. This is important." Ted sent others with tasks. "Ron, contact your dad. Malfoy, has he contacted you?" Malfoy blinked. "Who? Contacted me?" "Never mind, not yet. There's something more urgent. I've discovered the goblins are going to rebel." His friends froze. They had been focused on investigating Professor McGonagall's ambush. How had everything suddenly turned into a goblin rebellion? 423. Umbridge, it's your turn. Ted gave a brisk run-through. How he'd discovered the anomaly, how he'd found the fairies mass-producing standard wands, and how he'd uncovered Fudge's connection to them. He mentioned Dumbledore, too, but Dumbledore had more pressing matters at the moment. "So, friends, it's time for us to step up. The wizarding world depends on us now. Without us, it's over." Ted's tone was contagious. It lifted everyone's spirits at once. Ron snorted. The wizarding world can only rely on us. Beat those stingy fairies. Beat that shameless Fudge. If it weren't for Gringotts, run by the fairies, our family would be better off, he added, muttering to himself and picturing old grievances. Suddenly, the opportunity for revenge felt real. Years of scraping by, of humiliation and resentful pride, now he could finally vent it all. Those things I couldn't get when I was younger will haunt me forever. Galleons, my darlings, I love you so much. He knew honestly that a lot of the Weasleys' tight finances came from extravagant spending, but the fantasy of payback was intoxicating. Jerry was eager to join in. Great, so, do we get Umbridge first? That damned Fudges always looked down on us demi-humans. Now he's going to pay. And that old toad Umbridge, she mocks my ears every day. Revenge time. During the half-month Ted and his group had been in France helping out, Umbridge had tormented Jerry relentlessly. He'd retaliated in small ways, sneaking a cage of mice into her office each night, but he wanted more. Neville stood quiet, fists clenched. For him, this was no joke. Rebellion hadn't been in his head before, but a goblin uprising aided by a minister of magic going rogue, that would be catastrophic. He felt the responsibility Dumbledore had instilled in him. They had to stop it. Hermione was more detached. Coming from a Muggle family, she'd read about goblin rebellions in History of Magic, but didn't feel the same visceral outrage. What unsettled her was the Ministry, its incompetence, and the horrifying thought that the Minister of Magic might be fomenting a rebellion. That was a new low. Harry, peculiarly excited, felt a premonition of a great battle. Her wand and her magic itched for action. Fight! Let's fight! I want to see rivers of blood, she blurted, half ecstatic. Fortunately, no malevolent warp sought her out, or Corn might have chosen her champion. Malfoy, by contrast, was composed. He stroked the slight stubble on his chin and considered the economic picture. So the recent price swings and large transfers in the magic materials market were the fairies doing? And Gringotts was involved? That explains a lot. He'd been raised to notice such things. Like his father, he'd spotted the economic anomalies. He wasn't afraid of a goblin rebellion. He didn't know the fairies' exact methods, but what could bring down Dumbledore and Ted? In Malfoy's eyes, Ted was already an equal to Dumbledore. Maybe not as powerful, but not inferior in cunning. The new potions, invented tools, spells and magic systems, mechanized magic constructs, enchanted variations, the whole magic net utopia, they'd all changed everything. In half a year, the world of magic had altered more than in centuries. From house elves to dwarves, gnomes, fairies, centaurs, and merpeople, everyone felt the shift. Most people either couldn't see it clearly or had become used to it. Malfoy, an attentive observer since first year, saw the pattern whole. If you can't beat them, join them. That was a good Slytherin maxim. Father would approve, he thought. He imagined Lucius's voice. Son, I'm not dead, I approve, and I joined faster than you. Malfoy allowed himself the fantasy. 2 days had already passed since talk of the Goblin Rebellion. It was time to deal with Umbridge. Letting her roam free had served two purposes, keeping an appearance of order and giving the students a common enemy to unite them. Besides, who would take the defense against the dark arts post if she were gone? The OWLs were only weeks away. She couldn't be allowed to cause more trouble. Remove Fudge's pawn from the school, consolidate power. 300 students represented over 200 wizarding families. United, they could prevent Britain's magical world from collapsing. That was why Fudge obsessed over Hogwarts. In the early hours, under bright stars, Ted climbed the astronomy tower and used a fire crab shell to divine the best day and place to confront Umbridge. He shook the shell 3 times, watching the coin's movements. His calculations pointed to tomorrow morning in the Forbidden Forest. It would be the perfect spot. I act in accordance with heaven's will, he murmured. All is well. Meanwhile, Malfoy had been interacting with his suddenly resurrected father on Ideal Land's social software. The exchange was painfully melodramatic. Do you know how I've lived this past year? Draco flared. Do you? That innocent Draco is dead. Because of you, father. Lucius's replies were theatrically affectionate. Child, the whole manor called your name when you were born. I watched you grow. I am proud of you. Ted, watching the exchange with amusement, thought they were putting on a show, maybe for him. Back at the Ministry, Umbridge received news that would delight her. Robert, Fudge's capable deputy in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Rumor had it he was dead. This was disastrous for Fudge and a personal opportunity for Umbridge. Robert had been her rival, the favored subordinate she'd envied. He'd even told her bluntly he didn't care for older women. The rejection had stung. Now, with Robert gone, she imagined herself taking his place in Fudge's esteem. Ha! Merlin's eyes are open. Whoever avenged me, thank you. That morning, she read the story in the Daily Prophet, in pink pajamas, printed with kittens. She waved the newspaper, giggling, jumping and shouting as if she'd lost her mind. She even took a swig of strong liquor while reading the lines about Robert. Little did she know that someone had already stepped into Robert's role in Fudge's inner circle and begun handling his affairs. Barty had a plan, and it was moving along. Umbridge hadn't given up on becoming a trusted confidant of the minister. She just needed to perform well and impress him. Arriving back at Hogwarts from Hogsmeade, she smelled faintly of alcohol. Filch, who had a knack for seeing what others overlooked, noticed but kept his mouth shut. She asked, in her usual thin voice, if any students had been misbehaving or if any professors had spoken ill of her. Filch produced a map he had found while chasing a student who'd been out after curfew. "I picked this up," he said, fawning. "It seems to be a map. It mentions Dumbledore, a secret weapon. I don't know what it is." "Give it to me." Umbridge snatched the parchment. It was a crude map of the area around Hogwarts and a scrawled note. "Dumbledore's secret weapon ready will be used during the election period." Fudge's earlier instructions, monitor Dumbledore, who was supposedly a threat to the ministry, suddenly felt confirmed. Umbridge's small eyes widened. "A secret weapon? To be used during the election? What is it? I must see it for myself." She was worked up, exactly where Ted wanted her. The map had been created by Ted as a psychic item with his mental power, an irresistible lure. Umbridge rushed toward the Forbidden Forest. Ted and his companions watched her movements through a crystal ball. She ran in, her excitement turning to regret as the dark, tangled paths proved treacherous, and the canopy blocked out the sky. "I'm the headmistress now," she muttered indignantly to herself. "I'll have every one of these damned trees cut down. I'll level the forest and build houses." Her tirade did little to endear her to the forest's inhabitants. After more than half an hour, she reached the spot marked on the map and ran straight into a group of centaurs. "Get out! You are not welcome here," they warned. "This is our territory. Leave, human," another barked. "She smells foul. I want to be sick," someone murmured. Umbridge's face went red. Looking down on what she called savage races, she flared. "You damned savages. This territory is recognized by the Ministry of Magic, and I am a high-ranking official. Offend me and I'll see you living in a latrine. You half-horse monsters, smelling like dung. How dare you insult my perfume, stupid beasts," she sneered, and then, maliciously, "You're Dumbledore's people, hiding a secret weapon to use against the Ministry? You want to rebel? I'll notify the Ministry and have you executed." Her insults were met with stunned silence. Centaur pride was deep. One of the leading centaurs drew his bow and shot an arrow that thudded into a branch above her head, a warning, not a kill shot. Startled, Umbridge panicked, and as if reflexively pulling the wrong pedal, she cast a stupefy spell that knocked the centaur leader down. The remaining centaurs erupted in rage. They surged forward, bound Umbridge as if she were livestock, and carried her farther into the Forbidden Forest. Umbridge screamed all the way, a high, frantic sound. "Is she okay?" Hermione asked, concerned. "Don't worry," Ted said. "Even angry, the centaurs won't kill someone. They'll make the old toad suffer, but they won't murder her." Ron scoffed. "Why worry? She won't die." "Should I tell the other students?" Neville asked. Ted shook his head. "Let's contact those closest to us first. It's not time to make this public." So Hogwarts once again lost its defense against the dark arts professor. There was no time to mourn. The fairies were about to come to the battlefield. Umbridge wasn't rescued immediately. A month passed before she was recovered from the Centaur tribe. They'd been reluctant to hand her over, but Ted personally negotiated and brought her straight to St. Mungo's hospital. Her condition was alarming. She had mental distress after the ordeal and physical problems as well. At St. Mungo's, Ted protested to the doctor in a voice of incredulous indignation. "What, doctor, what did you say? I'm not even married yet. I'm only 16. How would I know about such things? 424. Chaos arises from the northwest, turmoil in the devil world. The strange events that would follow were still unclear to most of them. Ted and his friends watched with relief as Umbridge was led away by the centaurs. She would certainly suffer for a while, and they didn't intervene. They contacted Sirius, Lupin, and other trusted allies, and quietly reached out to reliable classmates at Hogwarts. They couldn't tell anyone the fairies were planning a rebellion or that the Minister of Magic was compromised. That would be far too alarming and risk leaks. Instead, they said only that a major, confidential operation was coming, and they needed everyone's full support. The classmates, thinking it a grand event in Ideal Land, pledged their help. Just before dawn the next day, the 6 of them met at the secret base and slipped to Hogsmeade through a hidden passage. Sirius and Lupin were already waiting, both visibly excited. Sirius shouted, "By Merlin! How did you find out? The fairies and Fudge? Brilliant work." Lupin was more measured. "Are you certain, Ted? The fairies are plotting a rebellion, and Fudge is secretly helping them?" Sirius's reaction was proud and impulsive. "Look at our kids uncovering a conspiracy," while Lupin wanted to verify the facts before acting. Ted nodded and produced a video snitch, playing footage from inside the fairies' wand factory. "Wands? They're making wands? Good heavens, how many?" Sirius's voice sharpened. "At least dozens," Ted said. Lupin studied the shelves of wands, his face darkening. Not only were the fairies rebellious, they'd figured out rapid wand production. That was a huge problem, like someone secretly stockpiling weapons in peacetime. If discovered, it would be considered treason. Of course the wands don't match Ollivander's quality, but they can be made far faster, Ted explained, producing a standard fairy-made wand. "I suspect they have more tricks. They've been uneasy for years. They must have been preparing. Too many new things have appeared in the magic world recently. Something strange might surface." Ted warned them further. "They also have a force of monsters from another world, creatures on a troll-level strength, controlled by magical items. I estimate 300 to 500. This wasn't just hoarding arms. It was raising an army, an attempt to eradicate entire lineages." Ted and Sirius agreed to quietly alert trustworthy wizarding families like the Longbottoms and the Weasleys so they could prepare and, if needed, unite quickly. With Lupin, Ted focused on the werewolf situation. After 2 years of work on housing, jobs, and social reintegration, publicly disguised as a mysterious but popular furniture factory called Forest Wolf Solid Wood Furniture, most British werewolves had been brought under a formal program. To Muggles, it was an endorsed factory with hundreds of employees. In the magic world, it was a celebrated rehabilitation and training center. Many British and some foreign werewolves had joined the Royal Army, significantly improving public safety across much of Europe. With their contagion and transformation problems contained, werewolves had become a cohesive magical force that couldn't be ignored. Lupin wanted to secure those werewolves' loyalty and, at the very least, use their influence to keep the vampires neutral. In Britain, vampires were middling, only 7 or 8 significant families, and they'd long developed alternatives to drinking human blood. But in southern Europe, Romania, Albania, the vampires were far stronger. Lupin needed to prevent a repeat of a fairy-werewolf alliance strengthening the rebellion. Ted had even received pleas from vampires via Ideal Land, arguing for exemptions from the game's anti-addiction rules. They slept 10 months at a stretch, then might be awake for 10 days. It wasn't addiction. Ted had refused. If it weren't addiction, why did their accounts log 140 hours a week? He joked that the Geneva Convention didn't permit such prisoner abuse. If vampires bypassed limits, the in-game balance would collapse. Everyone had to prepare quickly. This would not be a 10-day skirmish. Supplies, potions, herbs, every kind of material would be needed. The magic world had little experience with a conflict on this scale. Umbridge, meanwhile, was stuck with the centaur herd. She hadn't brought her two-way mirror. Her wand had been taken and broken. Tied and humiliated, she cursed and ranted until midnight and received a few lashes that finally forced her to quiet down. She still muttered under her breath, stubborn to the end, but privately believed the centaurs wouldn't truly hurt her. She was a high-ranking ministry official, after all. Harm to her would have consequences. Fudge was frantic. He couldn't reach the acting head teacher. First, he'd lost Lucius, Luobote, after a dark wizard's attack, and Anderson, Barty's alias, had filled in. Anderson had proven reliable. But Umbridge's sudden disappearance infuriated him. He had promised the fairies a chance to lure Ted out of Hogwarts. Without Umbridge, he needed a new plan. He sent Anderson to Hogwarts with a plausible pretext. Invite Ted to the ministry to help with an investigation. Anderson knocked on Ted's door in full official posture. "Are you Ted? I'm Anderson, head of the Magical Artifacts and Supplies Inspection and Seizure Office at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. We need your assistance." Barty's performance was flawless. The facial expressions, the tone, even the pupil's dilation, partly because his current body was an alchemical construct with superior control. Ted cooperated. "What do you need?" "Don't worry. It's about an item you sell on Xianyu. We've found counterfeits and need your help identifying the fakes." A reasonable excuse. Ted agreed. "How long will it take? I don't want to miss my afternoon classes." "No more than 2 hours. If all goes well, maybe an hour." Ted left with Anderson. They did not appear at the ministry, but in a deserted alley. "Master, Fudge's plan was to lure you out, then ambush you on the way back," Barty said. "Likely fairies." "Maybe it's about Ideal Land," Ted mused. "That explains it," Barty said. "With Ideal Land changing everything, the fairies would want it secured." At the inspection office in Diagon Alley, Ted helped a few low-level ministry employees distinguish his genuine products from fakes. Someone had the nerve to counterfeit his wares and then prepared to leave. Anderson feigned attending to other matters and escorted Ted to the Three Broomsticks fireplace. Ted returned to Hogsmeade in a burst of green flame and instantly noticed 2 suspicious wizards across the pub. Although they were drinking, their peripheral attention flicked toward him constantly. Their thoughts were busy and complex. Tailors. Ted didn't hurry. He ordered a butterbeer and waited, confirming that his arrangements were set. When he rose to leave, one of the tailors adjusted his collar and casually pressed a hidden button. The signal went out. Ted had left the village. Outside, Ansu, Parker, Softy, and others lay hidden in the dark under Ideal Land's cloak. Everywhere inside and outside the village was already folded into the game's overlay. They found the ambushers, over 20 fairies and 2 magically driven mechs. Mechs. Ted's jaw dropped. He'd heard fairies liked odd inventions, but real magic-powered mechs? They were crude, heavy, and clumsy, nothing like Ted's or Ron's designs, but they were functional. Fairies didn't worry about efficiency. They had resources to spare. "They really respect me," Ted muttered. "They sent so many, and mechs." At that moment, mirror space quietly overlaid the real world, and Ted's dream sequence began to unfold, consuming the area. In the dream form, his captors, over 20 fairies led by elites, used 2 mech harvesters to overrun him, fought for minutes, and finally captured him. In the dream, they took him to a prepared location and interrogated him about Ideal Land and its back-end controls, then strapped a red crystal control ring, the kind used to command monster troops, onto him. The idea of being treated like a beast made Ted furious. But the fairies didn't realize they were dealing with a puppet. The real Ted watched the dream and began to write the script inside their minds, silently breaching their mental defenses, planting suggestions and backdoors, and sowing fabricated memories along the way. Ansu perched on Ted's shoulder, watching a team of fairies jubilantly take away a deceptive illusion of Ted, a shadow clone, and apparat off. "Are you just going to let them go?" she asked. "They're my pawns now," Ted said. "It's a good chance to see how much they've prepared. Let's find out what they plan for Ideal Land." Ted guessed the rebellion would start that night or the next day. He vanished and reappeared in the school's secret base. Meanwhile, the clone, programmed and mentally controlled, had been carried back to a fairy stronghold in England. There, the fairies who'd staged the kidnapping hurried to a makeshift magic net signal tower, helmets bristling with antennas, crystals, and circuits. They spent over half an hour trying to breach the Ideal Land backend, logging in but finding many permissions inaccessible. An hour later, the high-tech fairies were exhausted, sweat on their brows, eyes bloodshot. "It's not working," someone shouted. "Still not working." Several hackers collapsed, removing their conductive helmets to rest. The operation leader paced nervously. "What's wrong? Did the information the kid gave us lie? It was true, but the system is massive, too complex. Even with backdoors, we can't gain the permissions we need. We need time. How much time? At least 30 hours. There aren't 30 hours left. At most 10. Headquarters launches the operation then. How much can you accomplish? We'll do our best to block communications, forums. Don't try. Do now. The leader's patience snapped. Unless Ideal Land could be neutralized quickly, any rebellion would be exposed online within minutes, ruining their surprise. Up northwest in Ireland, Fairy headquarters, the Fairy Revival Army, was already fully mobilized and had been active all night, preparing for the operation. Time was running out. 4:25. Have a day off tomorrow. Taking the day off tomorrow. Happy Saturday, everyone. I've been completely engrossed in a novel, a Hong Kong entertainment story from a few years ago, and it's really good. Time to rest? Time to rest. Ted's trickster shadow clone had been shadowing the fairies at their outpost in England, watching them scramble to seize control of Ideal Land, monitoring their back-end data, and even observing the assassination squad they'd sent after Minister Fudge. Of course, Fudge wanted to use the fairies, and the fairies wanted to use Fudge. They didn't intend to let him live to see the rebellion. Whatever plans he had after that would be irrelevant. At that moment, Ted was explaining everything he'd discovered over the past 2 days to Severus Snape. Snape's office in the dungeon smelled of old parchment and potion fumes. Though the fireplace burned, the room still felt cold. Snape himself looked colder. As Ted finished, Snape studied him with that glacial expression, black hair falling over his brow, dark robes hanging like a storm cloud. The air around him felt like the eye of a coming blizzard. Ted had long suspected Snape was on the verge of something legendary, but the quiet, oppressive certainty radiating from him only confirmed it. Snape had found the way, or at least a clear path. Impressive. Without a sound, he was lethal. Snape broke the silence. So Lupin and Black knew already, and I was the last to be told? Ted recognized the accusation. He flinched a little, then smiled. I expected you'd find out sooner or later. Something this big couldn't stay hidden from you. Ted thought he saw a twitch at the corner of Snape's mouth, but perhaps he misread it. Snape rose, opened a cabinet, and began to tidy bottles and vials with slow, precise movements. With his back to Ted, he murmured, "Flatter me all you like. It won't make me any happier." Snape had always been a master of occlumency. It was not easy to read him. Now that his strength had reached what people whispered as half-step legendary, his mental defenses were even more formidable. Still, he had noticed the fairies' odd movements long before Ted informed him. It had begun in the potion ingredient market. Rare potion components and combat essentials were being quietly hoarded. As a potion master, Snape was sensitive to such shifts. His contacts in the black market let him trace the unusual purchases back to the fairies. He suspected something. He didn't expect outright rebellion. Why now? Why neither too early nor too late? But once he pieced it together, he acted in his own way, stockpiling materials to ensure his supplies and to avoid being cut off. Hearing Ted's full report, Snape set aside his irritation about being the last to know and considered what could be done. Snape had little interest in the politics of the magic world. Aside from his private interest in undoing Voldemort, he preferred others to fight their own battles. But Hogwarts was different. It was more than just a school. It was a bastion, and he would not allow it to fall. So he prepared. "Fairies," he muttered while pulling vial after vial from the cabinet, clearly under an undetectable extension charm, short, ugly, and stingy. Every generation needs a proper beating to learn to keep its place. He packed potions with methodical calm. Prepare for battle. As head of Slytherin, I'll defend Hogwarts. Other places are not my concern. Ted nodded. Understood. Hogwarts is yours. With Hogwarts in Snape's hands, Ted moved on to the next problem. He slipped out the back door and, using his school authority, broadcast a message through the castle. Students of Hogwarts, this is Ted Epiphany. Due to a special emergency, I am addressing all faculty and students. Please assemble in the Great Hall in 10 minutes for an important announcement. I repeat, gather in 10 minutes. It was midnight. Most students were asleep, but the voice in the dormitories quickly stirred them. Kids stumbled out of beds, half-dressed or wrapped in sheets. Girls squealed and teased. The dorm outside Hermione's room erupted in gossip. "Is Ted coming to raid me tonight? Quick, lock your door." Hermione's roommates jabbered on, but then they saw Hermione, wide awake, already suited up. She wasn't in pajamas. She had on a dark robe embroidered with silver constellations, a 3-finger-wide tactical belt loaded with small tools and potions, a wand in her hand, goggles on her forehead, a necklace and rings humming faintly with enchantments. In short, she looked like she was ready for a top-tier raid. "Oh my Merlin," Padma whispered. "Hermione, don't scare us." In the Great Hall, the staff were already assembled. McGonagall was still in St. Mungo's, but the rest were present. Professor Trelawney, newly relieved of Umbridge's dismissal and ruffled by recent events, trembled so badly her spectacles nearly fell. Ted produced a small bottle of mead, placed a cheering charm on it with a touch of mind power, and handed it to her. "Drink," he said simply. She sipped and visibly relaxed. "Yes, thank you. I had a premonition. No wonder I drew the Knight of Swords in my tarot last week." She crowed the boast as she downed the mead. Hagrid shuffled at the side, nervous but eager, thumb worrying the handle of his umbrella. Flitwick climbed onto a chair, wand trembling with barely contained excitement, caught between proving himself and fear that the fairies' uprising might paint him as something else. The students arrived in small clusters, some still half asleep, some buzzing with nervous energy. Lee Jordan shouted before Ted could begin. "Ted, are we finally overthrowing Umbridge? Down with the pink toad!" The hall erupted. The twins grinned sheepishly. They'd already been warned by Molly Weasley through a two-way mirror an hour earlier, and they were a little miffed at Ron for not telling them first. Ted quieted the room. "Listen, this is more serious than Umbridge. It's more dangerous." A hush fell, and he said the words plainly. "According to reliable sources, the fairies are about to launch a rebellion." Silence followed. The students had no frame of reference for a political uprising on that scale. Ted explained what he and his contacts had uncovered, how the fairies had infiltrated Ideal Land and were mobilizing. "This is not a prank. I need you to contact your parents and relatives immediately and pass on the details." Ted held up a two-way mirror and began to mass send the information. The students looked at the adults behind Ted, alarm and stark seriousness on every face. It was real. Hundreds of kilometers away, the fairies at their outpost finally sensed that their plans had been compromised. On the Ideal Land forums, someone was competing for backdoor access. Chatter had been leaked. Wizards were being alerted. Panic rippled through the command ranks. "Captain, there's an anomaly in Ideal Land. Someone's interfering with our backdoor access." "What?" "Someone leaked our rebellion on the Ideal Land forum." "What?" "People are organizing, heading for the Ministry of Magic." The fairy intelligence officer staggered under the shock. He barked orders at once. "Launch an attack on the Ideal Land forum. Delay them. Deploy the mech units. Seize the Ministry of Magic and St. Mungo's immediately. We can't let the wizards organizing time." But their manpower was thin. From the mainland bases, he could muster fewer than 200 fighters, enough to split and seize a couple of targets, but not to hold everything. They would have to wait for reinforcements from Ireland to secure Hogwarts, Hogsmeade, Diagon Alley. Still, the offensive would begin in a few hours. They thought they had time. They were wrong. The trickster shadow clone had been planted inside the mech workshop. It raised its voice, and then it shouted, thundering fury. Lightning erupted, branching in countless forks off the clone, as if the workshop had become a storm. The room was bathed in a blinding white flash. The lightning spell was designed for breadth, sacrificing raw power for coverage. It lit up nearly 80% of the several hundred square meter space. Electricity danced across unfinished mechs, lathes, control consoles, and menaced the fairies. About 70% of them crumpled, convulsing as the surge overwhelmed their bodies. Fairies, on average physically weaker than humans, were particularly vulnerable. The remaining dozen or so were better equipped. Their automatic enchantments erupted. A blue translucent shield snapped up around the intelligence commander when the lightning hit, and several fairies drew quick wands or cast bare-handed spells. A spray of colorful curses streaked toward the clone. The trickster shadow clone did nothing to dodge. It reached out, clenched a fist, and the air around it tightened. Screams cut across the workshop. Half a dozen fairies grabbed their heads and collapsed. eyes rolling as blood trickled from their faces. Ted's mental squeeze had pierced their mental defenses and forced them into a deep, paralyzing sleep. A few resisted. Ideal land hackers wore helmets bristling with diodes and shielding runes. The protection waddled and popped as smoke began to curl from their gear. The intelligence commander himself held a piece of mental protection magic. The fairies had invested in that field, since they used mind controllers on beasts and constructs. He still stood. The clone's power was dipping after the two big moves. Seeing the outpost could become a trace, it decided to raise it. "Art is an explosion," it announced, then detonated. The workshop went up in a spectacular fireball. Flames shot high into the night sky. Thick, black smoke rolled over the wreckage. The blast sent debris and sparks across the clearing and woke half of England. At the same instant, across the city, the Ministry of Magic fell into chaos. Minister Fudge was working late. Security at that hour was thin, only a handful of aurors and wardens on duty. A small, skilled fairy team struck quickly. They pinned the guards, forced their way past the wards, and apparated away after their hit. By the time those left at the ministry found the scene, there was blood and a struggle, and the Minister of Magic was dead in his office, gone in the night. His eyes were frozen in shock, surprised until the end. 4:27, Goblin Rebellion. 1:40 a.m., 20 minutes before the Minister of Magic, Fudge, was assassinated. Fudge had been working insane overtime for the past 2 days, something unprecedented for him. The Ministry of Magic was the sort of place where everyone clocked out on time. There was no real reason to stay late. But if the minister wanted to do more before he stepped down, who could blame him? Most of the other ministry officials didn't take it seriously. It was only something to gossip about over tea. They speculated about how different Fudge had become between his early and later terms, and how reluctant he was to give up power. He must be terrified of what those pure-blood families will do to him, they said. After all he's done, oppressing them, centralizing power, promoting people like Luo Bote to deputy head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, he won't be forgiven easily. Then what can he do? Run away, go abroad, Africa, America. If he stays, they'll come after him. Fudge, however, was not sitting in his office waiting to be hauled away. He was waiting for an opportunity. He had decided to use a goblin rebellion to redeem himself. If the uprising broke out under his watch, all the emergency responses, the supplies, the strike wizards, the newspapers, everything would put him at the center of the recovery. He imagined himself the hero of the British magical world. It was a desperate, single chance. He had misjudged badly. He understood politics from a wizard's point of view, but he had little real experience with the goblins. He assumed they would play at power like politicians. They did not. Goblins went straight for the most direct solutions. Nothing Fudge had prepared mattered the moment physical elimination was possible. Barty, his dutiful assistant, was the weak point. Barty knew a shortcut, he said. What he actually did was quietly disable some of the protective enchantments Fudge had set around his office. At 1:40 a.m., 5 goblin assassins, elites all, slipped into the ministry and ambushed the minister. They struck with 3 fatal dark spells in rapid succession. Fudge barely had time to look toward the figure who kicked his door open. Then he saw hideous goblins and strange dissonant curses. He died with surprise frozen on his face. Astonished that goblins would attack him, and astonished that they had bypassed the wards he'd been so careful to set. Barty had removed spells Fudge had forgotten to bolster. He was that helpful. The 5 killers were experienced and efficient. They left as quickly as they had come. By the time staff on duty noticed the spike in magical activity, the assassins were already retreating. 4 ordinary wizards tried to stop them. They were overpowered and beaten down. As the goblins made their getaway, an explosion tore through their outpost, flames more than 10 meters high, obliterated by what witnesses later described as a clone of Ted. In the chaos, ministry staff found Fudge's body. The corpse was grotesque. A gaping 30-centimeter wound split his chest. Beneath the skin, his vessels had turned black and bulged like roots, and a pool of viscous black blood oozed under his body. The post-mortem showed 3 lethal spells had been used. One that cleaved his chest and heart in half, one that rapidly corrupted and coagulated his blood, and the killing curse. The combination left him unrecognizable. Meanwhile, the main goblin force in Ireland had mobilized. A shimmering blue portal, an enormously expensive military-grade transit built with resources most wizards could never touch, opened, connecting to a park in the London suburbs. The plan had been to begin the rebellion at 4 in the morning, when people were at their most relaxed, but their outposts' early reports forced them to move ahead. Over 3,000 troops poured through the gate under the command of goblin slave owners wearing ruby crowns. They had rehearsed the crossing. What would have taken ordinary means minutes by whatever standard, their transfer completed in 10. Each unit carried standard wands and a few magical implements. Each team also had a goblin carrying a box of miniature magical mechs. They expected their outpost to hit the Ministry and St. Mungo's first, so when the outpost could not be contacted, panic spread. "Corbic, what is he doing? Didn't he say they would attack?" a commander barked. Scouts were sent, but reports came back. The outpost had exploded. All that was left was a smoking pit 5 or 6 meters deep. The outpost was gone. With no time to wait, the goblin commanders ordered a direct strike on the Ministry of Magic. "Monster 1st and 2nd units, attack!" they cried. The army surged. Hill giants, ogres, trolls, goblin soldiers, and the lumberjack mechs, bulky, 3-meter-tall constructs driven by goblin magic, moving in toward the Ministry's outer gates. The Ministry's defenses were not non-existent, far from it. The area in front of the underground gate erupted with protective enchantments, and several of the larger monsters were trapped as they charged. A hill giant was pinched by stone pillars that twisted and clamped him like a spit over a fire. Others were bound by animated plants or sealed into the ground. But the attackers numbered in the hundreds, 500 monsters backed by 50 or so goblins and a dozen lumberjack mechs. The first line of spells, 100 or so non-lethal protections, had rarely needed to be used, but now they were tested. Panic spread through the Ministry. Wizards who had never seen a proper battle froze. Fortunately, Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was present. She snapped everyone into order. "Pardley, activate the defense system. Hallier, notify the strike wizards and aurors. Paramella, post an urgent notice on the Ideal Land Forum, level 1 alert. Call all wizards to defend their homes." The staff, jolted into action, began to execute their duties, but the calm lasted less than a minute. More monsters poured in, and the lumberjack mechs pushed forward. The mech's shells were cast from magic iron plates with level 3 resistance. One arm was a whirring circular saw, the other a mechanical claw that could grasp, scratch, or be launched on a chain. Blue magical light flickered through their seams. Built-in shielding and mending runes reduced damage and auto-repaired the plating. 2 of them set their saws to the Ministry's massive sealed metal doors, 3 meters high and 30 centimeters thick, enchanted and built to withstand sustained magical assault. Normally, it would take many wizards several minutes to breach them. Under the lumberjack's saws, sparks flew and enchantments cracked. In under a minute, the doors began to give. Outside, 400 to 500 monsters waited, and more mechs and wand-bearing goblins crouched in ambush. Inside the Ministry, the mood turned grim. "They're rebelling," Bones said coldly. "This is war. Fall back to the second line of defense. Shrink the battlefield so their numbers can't overwhelm us. Hold out a dozen minutes. Reinforcements will come." "Right, reinforcements," someone shouted. "We have Dumbledore." At the name, a wave of relief briefly passed over the defenders, as if speaking it could summon salvation. The goblin commander, however, was sweating. The outpost's destruction was a mystery. Who had exploded it? If the Ministry bought time now, everything the goblins had worked for 2 decades could be lost. He ordered all-out pressure. Big weapons first, split forces to seize key points. 50 goblins were sent to seize Diagon Alley, 200 to St. Mungo's to hold the only hospital in the British magical world. Hogwarts and Hogsmeade would be next. The Ministry's isolation made the situation worse. The Flu network had been shut down. Its fireplaces were now just ordinary hearths, because the Flu powder monopoly had been infiltrated by goblins years ago. With apparition and portkeys banned on Ministry grounds, the Ministry had become an isolated fortress. Only the nearby magic telephone booths and the Flu network could have allowed quick travel, and both were compromised. Inside, Only 46 wizards remained to hold the line against an enemy numbering over 500, a mix of monstrous frontline troops and mechanized siege engines. Then the goblins' explosives did their job. A massive bomb placed at the battered main entrance detonated with a thunderous boom. The door that had kept the ministry safe for years was shattered and thrown open. It was 3 a.m., less than 20 minutes after the initial attack. Wizards scattered. Parents rushed toward Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. Those nearer St. Mungo's made for the hospital. Diagon Alley was evacuated as shopkeepers fled at the news. Nocturne Alley was different. Its darker inhabitants were not eager to abandon their goods and met the goblins in the streets, trading curses and scraps as monsters and mechs chased them down. Ted went to work. Using Ideal Land, he live-streamed battlefields, sent out reports, shared intelligence, and coordinated improvised commands. Hundreds, almost 1,000, goblins and their allies took part in the initial offensives, dividing into multiple columns to seize key locations. Of the wizarding population, fewer than 1 in 10 had combat training. Caught unprepared, they were often no match for the goblins' coordinated strikes. Most did what they could: escape, hide, and fight guerrilla style. Ted's training programs had reduced the casualties, but the order and structure of the wizarding world were collapsing. Messages flooded the forums. "Where is Dumbledore? Someone invite Dumbledore," people pleaded. Dumbledore was not free, he was detained. Instead, Ted reached out to the International Confederation of Wizards. "Are you going to respond to this goblin rebellion or not? If you won't, I will handle it my way." Thanks to book friends Yen Yeju and Nu Xin Kwang for the 100-point reward. Thank you. 428. The Ministry of Magic fell. Utopia came what mattered most when undertaking something big. There were too many answers to fit into one sentence, but having a just cause was undeniably crucial. If the name isn't right, the words won't flow. If the words don't flow, the deed won't get. Without a plausible, widely accepted justification, even the best intentions can end in tragedy. You can raise money, hire builders, finish everyone's long-abandoned projects, only to be arrested for illegal fundraising. It's not that people are blind to the good done, it's that the law demands a grand, legitimate pretext. That's why Ted contacted the International Confederation of Wizards before moving against the fairies. He knew they were exhausted, still reeling from the Dumbledore affair and unable to fully support Britain's magical world. He still had to notify them and make demands. Whether they could help wasn't the point. If they couldn't, they would have to make a promise, an official backing for what he planned. When the Confederation replied or failed to act, Ted began his overt campaign. He posted a bold, sticky headline on the Ideal Land Forum front page: "The magic world is in peril. All wizards unite." The article laid out the Goblin Rebellion, posted video and photos, and described the fairies' preparations: standardized equipment, logging mechs, monster troops. He called on every wizard, north and south, England and Scotland, to take up their wands. Combat-trained wizards should harass the fairies' forces. Those unsuited to battle should fall back to secure rear areas, accept unified command, and handle logistics. He divided Britain into 9 regions with contacts and commanders. He recounted the ministry's stubborn resistance, the fierce fighting in Hogsmeade, Hogwarts as an emergent command center, and statements of support from Ironhammer Fortress's dwarves and gnomes, the elves of Hundred Flowers Valley, the demi-humans of Dickamond, the werewolf organization of Forest Wolf, everyone condemning the fairies. Ted listed 9 major grievances against the fairies: financial monopolies that drove prices up, their insatiable control of magic metal production and hoarding, to stir the wizards' anger and resolve. The message was simple: organize and unite, and victory would belong to the wizards. The fairies saw the post immediately. Compared to most wizards, the fairies cared about Ideal Land even more. The goblin leader was furious. Nothing had gone right so far. Their plan had been a surprise strike, but the ministry had mustered many officials and held out longer than expected. Intelligence centers and outposts had been bombed, mech factories among them, responsible for a large portion of production. Now the enemy had posted a rallying call online, stabilizing morale instantly. How could this be? Wasn't the plan to control Ideal Land? The wizards were already formulating strategies and regional plans in plain sight. If the wizards, previously disorganized and stunned, got a chance to organize, the fairies' early game advantage would evaporate. There were only 30,000 wizards in Britain and fewer than 4,000 fairies. If the fairies didn't turn a quick advantage into a snowball, the mid-game would favor the wizards. Then, with a thunderous boom, the Ministry of Magic's gate was blown sky high. The wall beside it crumbled, leaving a 4 or 5 meter breach. Good, good, full attack! Destroy the ministry! Kill every wizard inside! The goblin leader shrieked. Is the anti-apparition array ready? Rest assured, my lord. It's in place. No one inside can apparate or use portkeys, and the flu network has been cut off. They're trapped. If they could wipe out the ministry, it would be like taking the mid lane's first tower, a huge advantage and a devastating blow to wizard morale. The fairies' first step of the snowball had begun. Enormous monsters, controlled by fairy slave masters, surged forward as frontline cannon fodder. Behind them came goblin spellcasters and logging mechs. The ministry's gate plaza was wide open, perfect for an assault. Under Minister Bones's command, the wizards abandoned the plaza and fell back into the ministry's main building, preparing for brutal close-quarters fighting. Every office, every corridor would be a battleground. A surveillance snitch hovered erratically in the sky, buffeted by the explosion. Higher up, a magic flying device, the size of a person, opened its belly and released 5 fist-sized disillusionment charm camera snitches. Their alchemical surfaces, inscribed with runes, let them adopt surrounding colors like chameleons. Though not truly invisible, from 50 to 60 meters away, they were very hard to spot. The 5 snitches slipped silently inside and live-streamed the mayhem from multiple angles. Monsters and clumsy dark mechs wrecking the building like a demolition crew, while wizards fired spells from windows and corridors to repel goblin spellcasters and attack the advancing machines. The monsters had decent magic resistance. The mechs absorbed damage. Debris quickly clogged the entrance and corridors. 3-meter-tall monsters created a crushing sense of oppression. Corridors were only human-sized, though, so only one monster could enter at a time. Mechs couldn't fit and tore through walls instead. The ministry's wizards fought and retreated, killing over 20 monsters and severely crippling one mech, but the first floor was lost. Ordinary spells, Relatio, Stupefy, did almost nothing. Only powerful effects like Defindo and Confringo made a mark. Many wizards resorted to dark arts. That was effective. One mech was disabled by a dark acidic cloud, a dark green mist that seeped into the mech's crevices, corroding non-magic resistant circuits and structures. The goblin pilot dissolved into a puddle. The live stream exploded with reaction. A few purists protested the use of dark arts as criminal, but most viewers argued that the acid cloud was an item from the game's Wailing Caverns dungeon, designed for rapidly regenerating monsters. It held the fairies back for over 3 minutes before a goblin water spell neutralized it. It had smashed a regenerating troll, a taurine, a hill giant, and a mech. After that, ministry wizards began to experiment with unconventional magic learned from the game: mudslides, ice shards, micrometeor showers, oil explosions, tactics that let them claw back ground. For a while, they actually held their own. "Bring the bombs, bring up the explosives," the goblin leader roared. A goblin demolition expert staggered forward with a barrel and launched a head-sized bomb down a corridor. "Flintstone fireball," Minister Bones responded, striking the bomb back midair. The goblin went straight to heaven. Still, the first floor had already been shattered by mechs. Alchemical explosives tore at the building from all sides. The ministry was crumbling. At most, they had 10 minutes before being wiped out. A drooling ogre with red eyes and a great scythe charged through with a howl. An explosion had knocked a wizard to the ground. He would have been cut in half. But 3 spells hit the ogre, sending him flying. His scythe skittered past the wizard's back. He crawled up, chest burned and vision clouded, howling on. 20 meters away, a goblin slave master wearing a ruby crown pushed its spirit, forcing it to ignore pain and continue the charge. Barty, in the crowd, used a spell to fend off a 2-clawed monster and saved another wizard. He'd already saved 6 people that night and felt the weight of goodwill piling up. He glanced at the time. If they dragged it out any longer, they probably wouldn't hold. He retracted a hand into his sleeve, made a gesture, and activated a long-prepared enchantment. They had anticipated a heavy goblin strike. The Ministry's original defenses and some additional systems Barty had secretly added sat on a large ley line node here, with abundant magic. If overloaded, those systems would momentarily throw the goblins off balance. Barty did not expect to turn the entire battle, but he could cause casualties. His greatest trump card, though, was his own body. It functioned as a huge signal transmitter and positioning device. For ideal land to arrive, a necessary step for Ted to open mirror space and pull wizards into a safe dream, Ted normally needed towers and alchemical arrays. With Barty in place, transmission was possible. Ted could not let the Ministry's officials die. As the defense systems surged into overload, decorative crystals on the walls and eaves flared to life, firing lasers at the attackers. In 30 seconds, they shredded 20 to 30 monsters, a dozen goblins and 3 lumberjack mechs, and the mirror world, Ideal Land, took the chance to descend. The goblin leader's vision blurred and then cleared. After the defenses briefly failed, the attack began to falter. Previously, 70 to 80 wizards had fought for 20 minutes and killed only 6 or 7 monsters, a couple of goblins and 1 mech. But within 5 minutes of the overloaded defenses, another 4 or 5 monsters and 2 goblins were dead, and a lumberjack mech plunged through the floor from the third to the first, snapping a leg. Frontline goblin slave masters felt it most. Where they'd once controlled 7 or 8 monsters, now trying to handle 3 gave them splitting headaches and nosebleeds. The monsters, lacking higher intelligence, grew sluggish. Another 5 minutes passed. The second floor was mostly destroyed, but wizards had retreated to the third floor and the staircase could not be breached. Another dozen monsters fell. 2 high-spirit goblin slave masters accidentally died. Something was very wrong. The goblin leader wasn't a fool. He wondered how the defender's offense had suddenly become so sharp. "Full attack! Bring out your trump cards!" he barked. A dozen goblin spellcasters in the square pulled out blue powder, traced a magic rune on the ground, and began a cooperative cast. A large dark cloud gathered 20 to 30 meters above the building. Experienced players watching the livestream recognized it, a massive blizzard, the Violet Mage's ultimate skill from Stormwind City. Not only wizards knew game spells, goblins weren't stupid. The remaining 6 lumberjack mechs gathered, flared with blue magic, and suddenly combined into a single towering construct. 6 mechs became a 6-meter-tall giant with 12 mechanical arms, as tall as a 2-story building, able to peer directly at the wizards on the 3rd floor. "We can't hold. Prepare to retreat," Barty shouted, startling his colleagues. "Retreat where?" someone cried. At that moment, a blurry barrier shimmered into being inside the Ministry, an emergency escape passage. Barty leaped down first, and the others followed in stunned silence. "I've worked at the Ministry for 40 years. I know this building. I've never seen that staircase. Where does it lead?" one muttered, but there was no time to debate. The 6-meter mech smashed the floors, and ice the size of heads rained down. The entire building was about to collapse. "Run." Outside the building, Ted appeared and swung his wand in a wide arc. A horizontal tornado shot from its tip, wind force spiking to level 10. Such wind would be hard to blow a human over, but goblins were light. 30 goblins in the rear failed to notice Ted behind them. The horizontal tornado lifted them and the surrounding debris like a blender and hurled them away. Ted's other hand, sword pointed at the combined blizzard, fired a dazzling blue lightning bolt that drilled into the casting formation. The dark clouds dispersed at once. The dozen goblins casting together convulsed, coughed up blood, and collapsed. "Patronus, Black Dragon," Ted intoned quickly. From behind him leapt a Patronus in the form of a black dragon nearly 2 meters across. It charged the goblins, monsters, and mechs in the Ministry Square like a freight train. Its head bristled with 9 horns, its maw a black hole. Anything that entered vanished. A 3-meter mech became lodged in its jaws, but the dragon slammed it, rolled over it with its 30 to 40-meter-long body, and destroyed it. In 12 seconds, the dragon had wreaked havoc, then circled, rose behind Ted, and vanished. By then, most Ministry personnel had fled into mirror space. Ted, without a word, shook his fan fengyi and rose into the sky like a burning comet, flying away. The goblin leader realized, too late, what had happened. In those 12 seconds, he'd lost 20 to 30 monsters, 40 to 50 goblins, 30 plus swept away or killed by the tornado and others eaten by the dragon. 2 mechs destroyed, 2 heavily damaged, and countless wounded. Chase him! Kill him! Quickly! Ted had already climbed 50 to 60 meters and kept going. The giant mech's claws rattled and extended, but their 30-meter reach couldn't catch him. Ted had done enough. Viewers in the livestream begged, "Keep killing! Let the black dragon finish them!" Ted saw the comments and replied dryly, "It's already full. It can't eat anymore." Although Ted could have wiped the Goblin Rebel army out himself, he chose not to. Wizards needed a war they all participated in and finally won through hardship, so they would learn and be prepared for the other, grimmer wars to come. Thanks to reader Shishu Chengmo for the 500-point reward, and to reader 63111 for the 100-point reward. Thank you. Chapter 429, Launch a General Attack. Target Hogwarts. A group of younger students from Hogwarts burst into the command room. Hermione, Diagon Alley needs help. 3 goblin mechs showed up, and the people there can't handle them. They're falling back. Hermione pinched the bridge of her nose. I told them it's not time for a counterattack yet, but they had to try anyway. Well, their shops got robbed. Can't blame them. Damn fairies and their looting. Complaints weren't going to change anything. Hermione tapped the magical display before her and pulled up a map of nearby forces. All right, send the nearest elite squad to support Diagon Alley. Aurors, bring a few magic-piercing cannons. Tell everyone to avoid pitched battles and minimize casualties. Got it. I'm on it. The student messenger rushed off. Hermione marked the elite unit's route on the map. The magic-piercing cannon was new and lethal, a cannon that fired alchemically primed rounds with a burned steel core. The primer ignited the gunpowder on impact. The enormous explosive thrust drove the burned steel core through most magical protections. Even a level 5 magic resistance usually couldn't stop it. Paired with a massive high-explosive charge, nothing short of a dragon could survive a direct hit. Not even the fairies' iron-shelled lumberjack mechs. Ron had been the main engineer. He drew the blueprints and integrated designs he'd been tinkering with in the game. Ted supplied key components, improved primers, high-explosive alchemical powder, and the burned steel cores. Ted controlled the players' inventions. Ron found which parts to combine. They hadn't had time to fully test it, but the prototype worked spectacularly. Lumberjack mechs were punched through like paper, giant bull's head-sized holes ruined in a single hit. The pilot could only cry out as the machine was scrapped. The cannon needed very little magic to fire, had a simple sight, and was easy to operate. Experienced players, archers, or those used to magic turrets could fire with speed and accuracy. 1 shot, 1 kill. Outside Hogsmeade, 20 standard lumberjack mechs and a 6-goblin combined super mech were blown apart by these cannons. The fairies had thought a force of 500 monsters, 50 spellcasters, and over 20 mechs would crush Hogsmeade. The attack started smoothly for them, but the magic-piercing cannons changed everything. 80 of those weapons hammered the attackers. In the end, only a dozen fairies surrendered wounded. The rest were annihilated. The results stunned everyone. Many of the older wizards could use the ideal land system only awkwardly, like elderly people learning phones. They couldn't adapt in time. But when the lumberjack mechs the fairies relied on were cut in half by new weapons, the tide turned. The mechs pushed in, and the wizards were losing ground fast. In 10 minutes, a quarter of Hogsmeade's 400 or 500 houses had been leveled. At that critical moment, Ted led upper-year students and their parents into the fight. The younger wizards, used to sneaking in the game, took to rooftops, hideouts, and ruined walls, firing the piercing rounds from concealed positions. Explosions answered them continuously. In 3 minutes, nearly all lumberjack mechs were gone. Monsters that had fought without fear suffered heavy losses, and the remaining fairies broke and fled, straight into ambushes set by the hit wizards, the magic world's peacekeepers, and the Aurors who had been called in. A goblin unit that had seemed a strong flanking element was wiped out within 10 minutes of Ted and his new-style wizards entering the battlefield. The contrast to the previous 10 minutes was stark. The era had changed. Hogsmeade's victory gave the wider wizarding community a badly needed boost. The Ministry had been scrambling. Some ministry officials only avoided disaster because Ted drew the fairies' attention away at a critical moment, but after Hogsmeade, it was clear. Fairies were not invincible. Guerrilla attacks and small-scale harassment became more common. Diagon Alley remained under fairy occupation, and some wealthy shops had been looted. Fairies were notoriously greedy and undisciplined, but outside St. Mungo's, fighting still raged. Professors and most of Hogwarts' forces had gone to support St. Mungo's. Sirius, Lupin, Madame Longbottom, the Weasleys, and members of the Order of the Phoenix were all engaged there. Fairies were no fools. Within an hour of the magic-piercing cannon's debut, they adapted. They added layers of powerful protection from arrows and deflection of attacks to their lumberjack mechs to blunt flying projectiles. A burned steel core relies on explosive propulsion to break through armor, a physical attack with a magical engine, and the fairies designed countermeasures accordingly. Goblin pilots modified or augmented their mechs with artifacts. Many worked well. The first wave had achieved extraordinary success because it was sudden and carefully planned. Now it was an arms race. Before Ron could deploy his second idea, the sonic shockwave bomb, battle-hardened wizards had already improvised a new tactic. They would apparate instantly next to a lumberjack mech, use a sticking charm to attach a piercing round to the hull, ignite the primer, and apparat away. The mechs, clumsy with limited vision, often didn't realize what had happened before they were cleaved in half. It became a fight of local heroes, wizard supers, striking fast and vanishing. No one slept that night. Late May daylight was already long. The sun rose early. That posed a problem. The magic world and the muggle world were separate but entwined. Diagon Alley was hidden, but it lay within London. Cannon fire, explosions, and mechs demolishing buildings made noise and attracted civilian attention. Muggles reported someone dynamiting fish, and the police were called. The Queen herself was reportedly roused and told the Ministry of Magic was under assault. The government took the statute of secrecy seriously. The magical shields and exclusion were tight, and in practice there wasn't much the Muggle authorities could do. They asked the public to stay calm and made excuses that this was a temporary exercise. Since the second half of the previous night, everyone had been flat out. Neville, Harry, and Malfoy led 40 or 50 older students as an elite combat unit, probing the St. Mungo's battlefield and striking then withdrawing. They went to Diagon Alley when needed, and once teamed up with a dark wizard in Nocturne Alley, using large cloud potions to kill dozens of monsters. They organized scattered adult wizards who wanted to fight but lacked coordination, sending them to harass fairy-occupied areas and harry supply lines. Jerry, as liaison to non-human students, rallied his kin, dwarves, gnomes, and elves from the school, organizing teams to take part in the war. The fairies' rebellion is unacceptable, they said. Jerry and his girlfriend Sherry alone killed 12 fairy spellcasters and 2 slave masters in one night and used alchemical fire to destroy 2 logging mechs. Hermione ran Central Command, allocating forces. Ron, as quartermaster, scrambled production lines overnight, semi-manually and partially automated, manufacturing magic-piercing rounds and sonic charges. Ted sealed battle zones in mirror dimensions to prevent Muggle exposure and directed frontline operations to keep wizards from getting lost or overwhelmed. By dawn, the fairy commander had a headache. Their logistics were breaking down. The wand supply was critical. Wands had always been the fairies' nemesis, and they'd expected to recover a stockpile from a moving wand factory. But after the ministry fell, the wand factory couldn't be contacted. Its underground moving mechanism, an enormous magical machine that drilled and relocated, had disappeared. It had run right into Ted's pocket. The fairy retrieval team triggered the mental backdoor Ted had left and were ambushed. The wand factory driver cut contact and fled. With the wand factory missing and much of the mech factory destroyed, the fairies simply couldn't keep up with consumption. In one night and one morning, nearly 60 logging mechs were damaged, about a third of their force. Wizards were now adept at guerrilla mobility. Apparition wasn't universal, only elite wizards used it, but those who did struck hard and fast with a 50% success rate. Either a mech was destroyed or the fairies lost spellcasters and monsters in numbers. Even failures were dangerous to pursue. The apparition traces could lead tracers into traps. The fairies were exhausted and unable to concentrate power effectively. The battle at St. Mungo's had stalled. It had been raging for 6 or 7 hours, and neither side had the upper hand. If the fairies dragged it out another day, their chances would vanish. In Ireland, their headquarters, they finally made a decision. Attack Hogwarts, take Hogwarts, force a decisive battle, commit everything. Reports flooded Hermione's command room. St. Mungo's forces were retracting. Diagon Alley attackers were pulling back. The main fairy forces at the Ministry were on the move. Hermione noticed the contraction in their front lines. Ted, they're making a big move. They're concentrating. They'll want a decisive battle, Ted answered. Where do they choose? Only Hogwarts. St. Mungo's can be abandoned. The school, this 1,000-year-old castle, is something the British wizarding world will never surrender. Whoever holds Hogwarts holds Britain's magic. Like an echo from the original history, Voldemort's obsession with Hogwarts, the fairies concentrated and then withdrew from London. They teleported north to the Highlands where Hogwarts sits, establishing expensive portals and pouring troops through so fast the wizards couldn't ambush them. The fairies learned from their failures. Logging mechs no longer went alone. Each was now escorted by 5 or 6 fairy spellcasters, a slave master, and several monsters. Spellcasters detect apparition traces. Slave masters control monsters as cannon fodder for clearing paths. It was a magical tank and infantry coordination. About 1,000 fairies now stood not far north of Hogwarts. Over 100 logging mechs and fewer than 2,000 monsters, reduced after the previous battles. 2 kilometers away, Hogwarts loomed on its hill, wrapped in a deep blue magical shield, the school's main defensive measure. The fairies brought up a strange device more than 4 meters long. Its front looked like a horizontal broadcast tower packed with layered apparatus. Its rear a huge, melted crystal core made from fused magic crystals as an energy source. A level 15 fairy spellcaster with an exquisite wand began charging it. 3 minutes later, a purple magic shockwave pulsed from the device and struck Hogwarts' shield, racing 2 kilometers in an instant. The shield flickered, faded, and began to disintegrate. Overjoyed, the fairy leader roared, "We have been enslaved for 1,000 years. Now we reclaim our blood debt. Kill them all. Rule the world. Fairies are the most excellent and noble race. Kill." The fairies were usually stingy, always haggling over every last nut. But when it mattered most, their moods flipped. They could go from calculating to recklessly aggressive in an instant. The goblin leader immediately seized on that change, sweeping them into a frenzy of control, and the main force surged toward Hogwarts. As always, the monstrous vanguard charged first. Only about 2,000 remained of that initial horde, but each was over 2 or 3 meters tall, muscle-bound behemoths pounding forward like a living freight train. Their steps shook the earth. They roared in a chorus of inhuman sounds. Under the push of the goblin slave masters, their eyes were red-rimmed, mouths foaming. They attacked like possessed animals. The sight was like a line of dump trucks bearing down, terrifying. Behind them came the lumberjack mechs. After a night and a half of fighting, the more than 100 survivors were hardened veterans. The machines had been heavily customized. The frames were the same, but every tool, external enchantment, and magical augmentation had been pushed to the limit. Over 100 lumberjack mechs advanced in 2 ranks like a wall of steel, and the gaps between them were packed with small fairies. The crowding looked like black sesame seeds on a flatbread. Among the fairies were spellcasters, goblin magical engineers who relied on devices, and goblin bombers with alchemical ordnance. The inner circle held rare spirit specialist fairies who controlled the monsters with cruel mastery. Further back stood a group of 30 elite fairies, levels 12 to 15, fighters only elite aurors would truly challenge. Only half of them were spellcasters, and those who were carried wands of unusually fine make, wizards' wands taken, accumulation of grim history. They had seen wizards die, seen corpses mangled by lumberjack mechs, and felt the horror of the dark arts. Even so, looking down from the castle, they were stunned. A vast tide of monsters advanced, crude and grotesque weapons in their hands, forming a terrifying forest of steel. The formation was unprecedented in the magic world. Wars once meant dozens at most. These were thousands. Many wizards had only read of such things in the worst years of Voldemort. Worse, the little wizards, those who'd come from the game world, knew something of true battle. When the level cap had risen to 40, players had been thrown into massive battlefields in the game, tens of thousands clashing over kilometers. On those scales, they'd felt like ants. This helped steady them now. Hermione stood on Hogwarts' highest tower. Ted had activated the castle's magic supply network and triggered the underground alchemy array that had taken years to build. Hermione began a guiding spell. By the end of the 3-minute cast, the fastest monsters had already reached the long bridge in front of the castle. The spell finished. Black stones appeared and spun in midair, rapidly swelling from fist-sized pebbles to meter-wide boulders, dozens, perhaps 100. The first volley of falling rock came from dozens of meters up and stopped the charge. These monsters were tough. Knife slashes wouldn't faze them, but a 2 to 3 ton rock falling from height did worse than cut. Over 100 huge stones crashed into the vanguard, reducing 30 to 40 monsters to piles of flesh on impact and crippling many more. The impact tore chunks from bodies. Even grazing hits left crippling wounds. The boulders smashed a wide swath out of the charging formation. Hermione did not stop. Her eyes glowed faintly blue. The stones began to shudder and, grotesquely, sprout limbs. They reformed into 2-meter-tall, slender stone figures. At the same time, the ground in front of the castle rippled like a pond. Mud rose, coalescing into shambling mud figures. Stone statues and mud golems, instant frontline meat shields, surged toward the suspension bridge. Professor McGonagall, healed enough after the fighting at St. Mungo's, stood at the castle gate. She raised her wand and intoned, "Stonemason, attack!" The carved figures along the castle walls stirred, leaped down, and more than 100 living stone statues formed a phalanx. She'd long wanted to try that charm. The monsters met it with barbaric force, cast-iron cleavers and spiked clubs smashing into stone, sparks flying. Mud figures flowed and grabbed, turning to subdue legs and restrict movement. The stone figures hit like sledgehammers. Stone on flesh made for a grisly tableau. Stones shattered, blood flew, and the battlefield became a storm of fragments and gore. Ted saw monsters trying to flank the stone line and rush the bridge. He sent out 2 of his cards, Granite Golem, blue, and Armored Troll, blue. Though not upgraded to red rarity, both had been with him through many fights. A 3.5-meter granite giant and a 3-meter-tall armored troll appeared, one at each side of the bridge like guardian door gods. A long-limbed green forest troll lunged with a spear at the granite golem. The spear shaft snapped against the golem's chest. The granite golem slowly reared back and then struck. Its bull-like fist smashed into the attacker, sending green blood and the creature flying. The armored troll faced a yellow-skinned ogre in bloodlust. An ogre's rare talent roused to murderous frenzy, but after a feint and a shield bash, the troll's cleaver sliced from shoulder to opposite rib, almost halving the beast. The gore sent viewers of the battlefield stream into nightmares. Parker had to censor heavily. Meanwhile, Hermione guided another spell. Fiery motes rose and transformed into flaming ravens, thousands of them, a burning flock that took flight. They were formed into an arrow and dove, not at the monsters, but at the lumberjack mechs and the goblin spellcasters behind them, those who were trying to erect new suspension bridges. The goblin mages' faces fell. They activated a large magic reactor and fired countless blue magic arrows skyward. Explosions overlapped in a deafening cascade, and yet a few fiery ravens broke through and detonated among the enemy. The ravens could seek and strike fairies in particular, exploding amid their ranks. The sky turned into a battlefield of flame and magic, the ground below a carpet of dying flesh. On the other bank, professors and older students had taken up the far end of the suspension bridge, casting across the 20 meters. The little wizards held the near end. Neville glowed with a golden aura a meter around him, wielding a light sword in one hand and a glintstone sword in the other, cutting through monsters like a berserker in living gold. Plants burst up around him to fight for him. "The 21st century is biology," he declared in action. Harry manifested his blue magic like a half-formed, multi-armed guardian, fist-smashing monsters several meters at a time with effects that stunned, crushed, or repelled. Malfoy floated invisibly overhead under Harry's cloak, casting Bloodthirsty Serpent. black mist that seeped into corpses and greedily drained spirit and blood, birthing more serpents inside the slain that burrowed into other monsters. Ron launched the first of his small craft above the field, its jets spewing azure shockwaves. He rained down alchemical explosives and potion jars. The logging machines were thrown into chaos. He even shot magic-piercing rounds at a distant large magic-conducting device. The shots punched through and destroyed it. Air superiority had not existed in the magic world before. Fairies were unprepared. The battle was chaotic. Two ratmen, Sherry and Jerry, sprang from the shadow of a level 13 fairy mage. Sherry's anti-magic daggers tore through multiple protective layers. Jerry's Defendo split the fairy cleanly as they struck in perfect coordination, then vanished. The fairy's front line inched forward. Some monsters had already reached the bridge, only to be cut down by teachers and students. Ted released his own strange reinforcements. Jackalweir troops, the Raptor Squad, the Death Rock Band, the Bone Brotherhood, the Aerial Corpse Fish, even Murloc Tidehunters. Their arrival surprised fairies and Hogwarts alike. Harry shouted, "Don't worry, there are reinforcements." The Jackalweir were not massively powerful against level 7 and 8 brutes, but they supported the lines. Grandpa Hog, axe and chainhammer in hand, charged like a legend, cutting through the horde and returning. Hermione's third assault sent hundreds of ice spears raining down. 10 minutes in, and Snape had mostly stayed his hand. He'd only cut down monsters that made it onto the suspension bridge, letting students learn in the Crucible. That leniency, however, had allowed the tide to creep in. Stone golems were nearly gone. Mud golems nearly halved. Animated statues had lost a third. The open ground before the bridge had been seized by the fairies. Both banks exchanged spells. Aurors and veteran wizards brought deadly, coordinated fire, but ordinary adult wizards, the parents, were mostly supplemental. The fairies had their own spellcasters in numbers and had been building temporary magic bridges. The bridge was on the verge of being captured. The fairies pulled a trump card, a combined magic-embedded shield. 40 to 50 magic engineer fairies clustered around a wheeled core device that linked their power into a single 10-meter-high, 30-meter-wide curved shield, powerful and self-repairing. Protected behind it, they pushed toward the bridge while withstanding dozens of spells per second. Wizards called to blow apart the bridge and cast in force, but fairies defended the deck, stalemating the line. Bridges were rebuilt again and again. The attackers advanced. Then Snape acted. He snorted and became a wisp of black smoke, shooting into the sky. The weather quickly turned. A strange, corrosive rain began to fall. At first, the fairies didn't understand, but soon terror spread. The metal shells of the lumberjack mechs and magic-conducting devices began to rust and corrode as if decades of oxidation hit in minutes. Even standard-issue wands decayed. Most deadly of all, the ruby spirit control rings on the monsters' heads started to rot away. The monsters, suddenly free from spirit control, fell into chaos. Some attacked each other. Others, full of unfiltered hatred, charged at nearby fairies. Rusting machines creaked and lunged at random, their chainsaws and claws thrashing. Many faltered, slumping to the ground mid-fight. Some disintegrated. Snape, half smoke, waved his wand and seized control of Malfoy's misty serpents, combining them into a 9-headed snake that rampaged through monsters and fairies alike. Ted brewed magic of his own. A dark cloud rolled in and lightning began to fall in staccato bursts, 5 or 6 strikes a second. Each hit could cripple or kill. Snape unleashed a massive sectum sempra across the field. Dozens of monsters were ripped apart into hundreds of pieces in a single sweeping slash. Ted summoned Dragon Annie. She'd grown fast on game experience and was already over 10 meters long. Ted rode her down onto the battlefield. Annie inhaled and expelled a searing gout of dragon fire, far hotter than any native dragon's breath, carving a 30-meter-long streak of flame through the ranks. Dozens of monsters went up like torches and burned to ash in seconds. The fairies' spells jabbed at Annie like tickles. Within 3 minutes of Ted and Snape's full intervention, the tide reversed. 200 or 300 monsters were dead or gravely wounded. Most of the rest had broken, and some turned on their former masters. 200 or 300 fairies were also killed or injured, nearly 20% of their force. Watching a dragon roasting overhead while Ted laughed on its back, the fairies' morale cracked. The fairy leader, seeing the shift, shouted, "Stop! We surrender. Guarantee our legitimate rights and we will negotiate." Ted laughed. "What did you say?" "I don't eat beef." He paused, grinning as he added, "Thanks to I'm offline for the 100-point reward." 431. Fudge helped the goblins with his clever plan, but Umbridge lost her dignity and he lost his life again. Still negotiating? Do you think that by stalling here you'll give those old men back in your Irish headquarters time to turn the tide? Ted's voice carried clear across the battlefield, loud enough that everyone could hear it even above the chaos. The goblin leader went pale. The muscles around his mouth twitched. Of course, his whole point had been to buy time. 3 minutes earlier, he'd radioed the headquarters across the sea and told the elders everything was going according to plan. Then he'd been hit by a coordinated strike from Ted and Snape. In a world of magic, raw power rests with individuals. Against wizards like Ted and Snape, advantages in numbers and equipment evaporate. The moment the goblin leader realized something was wrong, he reported back to the Elder Council. This was their worst fear. The Goblin Elder Council was stable and conservative. The Grand Elder told him to hold the attackers off temporarily and promised to send an ace to deliver a decapitating strike. So the leader stalled and signaled a call for negotiations in the hope the ace would arrive in 10 minutes, strike while the wizards were exposed, and the goblin forces would be safe. He never expected the plan to be seen through. Ted Epiphany, the leader, recognized the name. Rumors about him had circulated since he dealt with the basilisk at Hogwarts, and by the time he made a splash in Paris, he was already untouchable. By the Triwizard Tournament, everyone knew he was a major threat, and there had been many attempts to neutralize him. Wizards are elusive. The Flu Network and Apparition make them unpredictable, and Ted himself was irregular and reclusive. Several previous attempts had failed. Before the rebellion, the Vanguard Intelligence Unit even had a plan to capture him secretly and seize his world-changing invention, Ideal Land. The intelligence unit insisted they'd done it, but then their base exploded. While the goblin leader was still trying to stall, Ted didn't stand idle. He brought his hands together, rubbed them, and a spark appeared in his palm. The spark grew, swelling into a fireball over a meter across. He held it aloft. It sprayed outward like a miniature sun, rotating and glowing until it was blinding. "Wait, we surrender!" the goblin leader shouted, reaching out, trying to stop Ted from throwing. The fireball fell like the sun dropping from the sky, but at mid-fall it split into 100 smaller fireballs. They streaked down like brilliant fireworks, raining flame across the field. It was no weaker than the large-scale spells Hogwarts had cast earlier. The smaller fireballs smashed into the open ground, into goblin wards, into mechanical logging machines, into everything. The earth caught. A park-sized area outside Hogwarts' suspension bridge became a sea of fire. Snape hovered in the air, cataloging the spell and its caster. He thought, Ted shouldn't have even touched that door the way I did, but in terms of large-scale magic, the power and range of his casting surpass mine. It's a talent. Ted's 2 talents, magic conversion, purple, and magic shaping, red, make him astonishingly proficient with elemental magic. He can easily channel spells beyond his usual level. With this single extreme flame rain, at least 200 goblins were killed. Most of the logging mechs were destroyed. Over 400 monsters were carbonized, and more than 100 creatures choked on the smoke. Only those at the very edge of the blast had a chance to escape. The goblin leader pushed aside a twisted, ruined magical apparatus overhead and stared around, his face black with soot. Of the nearly 1,000 goblins who had set out, how many remained? Only a scattering were still nearby. Many others crouched and trembled on the battlefield, wishing they could burrow into the ground. The sight shocked even Hogwarts' teachers and students. It was like a warlord from a small country witnessing the field artillery of an empire for the first time. Just watching made them break into a cold sweat. The live stream flooded with outraged comments. They surrendered. Give them a chance to live. Goblin lives matter too. So cruel. He's practically a dark wizard. No, he's a dark lord. But Parker quickly blocked many of the comments and posted a mocking reply. I checked your addresses. Lots of you are in North America. Since you're so kind, we'll send the remaining few hundred goblins to you. Hope you don't make boots out of them. The chat erupted in laughter and vitriol. What a burn. People who've slaughtered millions are pretending to be kind. These first-gen North American wizards were part of those massacres of indigenous shamans. Hope your Thanksgiving turkey appreciates it. This is the goblins' fourth rebellion. So many have died, so much lost. Do we want it again? Next time, we'll all be slaves to goblins. Kill all adult goblins. Kill all goblins. Conservative voices always think the radicals are too soft. While Ted burned through the rebel forces here, the goblin headquarters on the Irish island had been wiped out as well. Ted had been tracking that headquarters since the Wand Factory incident. Only high-ranking goblins knew its location, and they had protective spells in their minds. Speak of it, and your brain burns, and a magical alarm alerts headquarters. Ted only found the island last night. The goblin leader had been calling repeatedly, and by narrowing down the area mathematically, Ted located them. Now Ted's main force, large game monsters and bosses under Barty's command, had completely annihilated the place. Not even a mouse stirred. The rumored ace turned out to be nothing more than a goblin assassin carrying a strange metal box of unknown principle, and he was killed before he could trigger it. So much for the decapitating strike. All right, we can talk about surrender now, Ted said later. We're not exterminators. I'm not some Dark Lord. You 300 or 400 surviving goblins will live on as a rare species in the magical world. I'll add you to the list of protected magical creatures. Diversity needs preserving, you know? By noon, the Goblin Rebellion was largely over. There would be follow-up cleanup, but Ted's part was finished. This revolt had been far worse than the 3 previous skirmishes. It was existential for the goblins, who had literally been betting the fate of their race. They lost the gamble, but Britain's magical community had been badly damaged. Casualties were grim. Incomplete statistics put wizard deaths at over 60. Many were taken in the initial attacks at home, caught off guard without internet news to warn them. Diagon Alley suffered the most. Some others died by accident. Under stress, they miscast lethal spells they hadn't used in years and killed themselves. 40 or so more sustained lifelong disabilities. 60 dead is already 1/500th of the British magical population of 30,000. If the fighting had dragged out, those figures could have multiplied. Economic and infrastructural damage was severe. The Ministry of Magic was almost destroyed. No standing headquarters remained. 2/3 of Diagon Alley was ruined. Most shops were looted, then burned to erase the evidence. Nocturne Alley was obliterated after fierce resistance from gray area wizards. 3 logging machines and several goblin demolition experts leveled it. Hogsmeade lost nearly 1/3 of its buildings, homes and storefronts alike. The cleanup would be a nightmare. And then there was Minister Fudge. He had been killed, assassinated by goblins. There should be a memorial. But as they searched the evacuated ministry for his body, they found it missing. Who would be so wicked as to steal a dead minister's corpse during such chaos? Fudge died in office, on duty, and even working overtime. But the truth came out quickly. Not only was his body missing, but evidence surfaced that Fudge had colluded with the enemy. Some officials urged Minister Bones to bury it, keep quiet to avoid embarrassing the ministry. They cared more about preserving their faces than anything else. But Bones, who truly detested corruption, reprimanded them and went public. She apologized to the public on the ministry's behalf, promised a full investigation, and pledged to restore trust. That stance won back some of the lower classes. Even the Weasley twins, while cursing the ministry, had to add, but with Minister Bones as minister, things might get better. Meanwhile, a 3-person delegation from the International Confederation of Wizards arrived to discuss stabilizing the British magical community, and Fudge's body was found. Good news, it was found. Bad news, it had run away. The corpse was no longer intact. It was blackened and bloated, the head shriveled, and on its chest, slightly to the right, sat a fist-sized eye. A golden vertical pupil, ringed by strange symbols, blinked and darted, with tiny tentacles probing the flesh. The thing tried to attack when discovered, but Aurors and a team of hit wizards were on guard and captured it without casualties. Fudge's former assistant said the eye looked familiar. He'd seen the minister holding a compass and muttering, and that compass looked just like the eye. It turned out that the compass Some alien artifact from another world had been tucked into Fudge's chest and parasitized him in death. The safest solution after consultation was cremation. They had no desire to study what the artifact really was or what it could do. There were too many of such items. The Department of Mysteries alone held nearly 100 otherworldly things. Elsewhere in the Ministry, and even in the Muggle world, there were more. Each one was a ticking risk. The rebellion also set London's gossip mill churning. Idle Muggles invented wild theories. Some serious-sounding rumors circulated. The Royal Navy had betrayed the Queen and was backing the 40-year-old Crown Prince to seize power. The Crown Prince, terrified, ran to his mother that night, tearful and begging for her long life. Other proposals reached the Queen. Perhaps the country and the Ministry should screen and carefully train children born with magic. And then someone remembered Dolores Umbridge, who had been sent to Hogwarts by Fudge to exert authority. Ted and his companions realized she was still with the Centaur tribe. Ministry officials sent to fetch her had been driven off. The junior staff who went were furious and complained the Centaurs were rude. So Ted sent Ansu. Ansu arrived at the tallest house in the Centaur settlement, the Elder's dwelling, and announced, "I am Ansu. My master is Ted Epiphany. I have come to collect Minister Umbridge." The old Centaur elder, long-bearded and wrinkled, smiled broadly. "Welcome, welcome, Mr. Raven Ansu." The elder had been relieved when the Ministry's envoys had been turned away. Young Centaurs had argued, "We caught her. She's ours. Why should you take her?" But the Centaurs had seen the fire near the Forbidden Forest when the goblins had been nearly wiped out a few days earlier. They remembered Ted's earlier lessons in the forest and the spectacle of the Triwizard Tournament. Ted had impressed and terrified them enough that none wanted another confrontation. Reluctantly, the younger Centaurs produced Umbridge, who looked disheveled and famine-thinned. "Thank you for your hospitality. The herbal tea was very good," Ansu said. The elder chuckled and handed Ansu a bag of tea leaves. Ansu dissolved into a wisp of black smoke, swirled around the confused Umbridge in the tea leaves, and vanished. The apparition left many young Centaurs stunned. Apparently, even their captor could apparate and carry people away. After a checkup at St. Mungo's, there was an awkward conversation between Ted and the doctor. Ted protested, "What? Doctor, I'm only 16 and not even married. How would I know about such things?" The doctor replied, "You're old enough to know some things. When I was your age." Cough, cough. Ever since, Umbridge flinched at the sound of anything like hooves. Not even her high heels could steady her nerves. What the Ministry would do, whether interrogate her, lock her in Azkaban, or give her special treatment, remained to be seen. Ted told his companions the story. They were stunned. Ron blurted, "Pregnant? Impossible. Didn't that wizard who studied centaurs say that centaurs and wizards can't produce offspring?" Jerry muttered, "Who?" "Ron, the one who seduced female centaurs, the head of the Horse Lovers Forum on Ideal Land. According to his research, wizards and centaurs can't have offspring." Jerry shot back in the ensuing silence. "Is this really all you think about online, my good brother? We still don't know exactly what Umbridge experienced in the Centaur tribe that day. As for Umbridge and her superior Fudge, one was a sleeping dragon, the other a young phoenix. Fudge's ill-advised plans helped the goblins and cost him his life, and Umbridge her dignity. Oh, one more thing. Ted suddenly remembered there was a deputy head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement whose memory had been sealed and who was trapped in the game. If he forgot, she would be an NPC forever. Thanks to reader Thulu Elder for the 5,000-point reward. That's too generous. Just a little something is fine. No more next time. Thanks also to readers I'm Offline and Quiet Wish for the 100-point rewards. Thanks. 432. Epiphany came to find me, and today I discovered it was me. How do you know if you're an NPC? You zone out a lot and have no tasks to do. You consume few resources and live frugally. You look ordinary and are simply modeled. You get new skins for festivals or big events. You focus on side quests and never affect the main storyline. You have low health and break easily. Your activities are limited. You can't cross servers or explore a larger world. Am I an NPC? One morning, the quiet village changed. Luo Bote, the village chief, woke with 3 questions pounding in his head. Who am I? Where am I going? What is the meaning of my life? Those questions seeded doubt. As a young village head who knew a little magic, he had guided novice adventurers to forage for herbs, mine nearby veins, and fulfill villagers' requests. He warned them of dangers and taught them the basics. Life had been ordinary, comfortable, a warm home, a loving wife, a newborn, the respect of neighbors. But now that ordinary life felt rigid and small. Compared to wandering adventurers, was he a real person? Was he merely an NPC? He paced and tossed in bed, unable to sleep. Ellie, gentle and attentive, rocked their son in her arms and noticed her husband's restlessness. While soothing the baby to sleep, she tried to soothe Luobote too. Luobote, don't think so much. Try to sleep. I can't figure it out. I can't sleep. Is that question worth losing sleep over? Of course it is. Who are we? Are we real like those adventurers? What if we're NPCs? If we aren't real, if we're NPCs, would you still love us? Is your love fake? I love you, all of you. My love is real. Nothing can separate our family. He hugged his wife tightly, but the hug was edged with fear. If they were NPCs, what could they do? The role of an NPC here was to serve players, give out quests, be background, help the story along. To break past the limits of an NPC and become a force in the game would require courage and choices made from the heart. Live for yourself. Don't be trapped by what others expect. Rebel. Luobote thought about that and then suppressed the thought. He had a wife and a son. He had responsibilities. Why risk it all for uncertain adventure? An NPC in this world enjoyed a stable position and security. Better to accept it, he told himself. Ignore the origins. Ignorance was bliss. But the change came anyway. A young adventurer knocked on his door. "Is Mr. Luobote home?" he called. He wore a plain robe and no gear, a fledgling, one would think. Yet his smile was painfully familiar, and panic flared in Luobote's chest. "Ellie, a friend's come by. I'll be out for a bit," he said, slipping his wand into his cloak, unused for nearly 2 years. At the village bench under the tree, the young man sat opposite him with that same radiant smile. "Hello, I'm Luobote," he began automatically. "May I ask who you are? How about we sit over there in the shade?" "Okay," the young man, Ted, replied. Ted produced a small crystal vial. Luobote's stomach tightened. Those vials were expensive, not something a novice adventurer would normally carry. Inside the vial shone a silver-white liquid. Ted uncorked it. The liquid vaporized, and a stream of memories began to spread, slipping into Luobote's mind like smoke. He came from a collateral branch of a pure-blood family, always on the edge of acceptance. He had been clever and studious, risen through the Ministry of Magic, and after 10 years and the right political moment, Minister Fudge's re-election scramble, he had become deputy head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Then someone like Ted had taken him, cast him into this crafted world. Luobote felt the full weight of that life. The stares of the ministry, the promotions, the responsibilities. He remembered a younger, more dangerous world, one that had no Ellie, no newborn in a quiet village. He wasn't the NPC. His memories, his feelings were real. But Ellie and the baby, the life he had here, were constructs of this world. "Why?" Luobote whispered, tears spilling despite himself. "Why did you come back for me? Why didn't you let me live here in peace?" He trembled then, outraged and broken, pointed his wand at Ted. In the world Ted had shaped, he could do nothing against him. In the other world, he was no match either. Still, the pain was raw. He slowly lowered the wand as despair took him. "Please, take my memories away. I won't hinder you. Just let me go back to my life here." Ted set him gently back on the bench. "I understand how you feel," he said. "I also understand your choice, but I'll give you another option." He spoke calmly. "Your wife and your son, they were not created by me, nor are they controlled by me. They are free souls. Their thoughts and feelings are their own. Their love is real. You've lived here 2 years. You must feel it." Luobote didn't know what to do. He listened and, as if on autopilot, believed Ted's words. Even if Ellie existed only in this world, even if she was a product of code, the love they shared felt real to him. That was enough. Ted continued, softer. "I can give them the ability to live freely in both worlds. They won't be trapped by the game any longer. They could do anything a player can do, even appear in the real world. I can give them bodies." Luobote's surrender came silently. He fell to one knee. "I am willing to serve you, master." The crow called, "Caw! Caw!" Ansu soared into the sky. The next days in the true world made headlines. The deputy head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement had been found. Official reports said he'd been attacked by a dark wizard and, severely injured, had been hiding and recovering. In the wake of the Goblin Rebellion, he was reinstated. Political spin aside, the man had been missing for less than a week, yet he had already lived a full 2 years in another world. Ted had personally arranged this man's background in the fabricated world, assigned him a vague past, introduced him to a partner. Luobote had grown competent here, married, had a son. Ted had created a life for him, and then offered him a choice. The Goblin Rebellion had been a turning point. Ted had appeared only at the end for less than 10 minutes, but his influence finished the conflict. The fairies suffered the worst defeat in centuries. Their numbers were cut, their fortunes seized to compensate the losses. Magical metal refineries, factories, books, Gringotts' positions, confiscated. The ministry repurposed their holdings, and the fairies were relocated to a barren, guarded region of the Scottish Highlands. From then on, their supplies would be sent through the Flu network. They were effectively turned into protected magical creatures. Money changed hands. The fairies had been wealthy from running banks, charging fees, selling strange insurance schemes, and monopolizing goods like magical metals. Now their vaults were open to recompense. The ministry, made up of people, argued who should benefit: repair the shops in Diagon Alley and Nocturne Alley, compensate the families of wizards who died, reward aurors and ministry officials, fund Hogwarts for its defense. Pureblood families who'd sided well in the battle expected shares in the spoils. Ted's name circulated everywhere. Mrs. Longbottom's letter to him brimmed with thanks, and the Blacks, Longbottoms, Weasleys, Malfoys, and others planned a banquet to honor him. Fairies fell, others prospered. Recovering British Gringotts felt like a great victory. Ted himself had not been idle. From monster hunting and quests during the campaign, he harvested 27,400 experience points. Ideal Land granted another 51,000 XP during the period, and he had 27,500 accumulated before, a total of 105,900 experience points. He also acquired 50 to 60 cards, mostly green and blue. Among them were 4 red cards and 1 purple. Call for magical support, red, a spell card summoning an Auror team to fight for 30 minutes, cooldown 7 days. Wizard Village, a material card that places a wizard village which automatically generates shops and residents. Geomantic Leyline Network Hub, a material card that places a deep underground hub providing magic power to arrays, buildings, and areas. Self-Service Gringotts, purple, a magic card that lets you randomly draw a treasure from Gringotts' vault, cooldown 30 days. His reputation soared across the British magical world, the ministry, and internationally. Riding a special giant dragon and planting a blazing sun in the sky were not easily forgotten. The scene had been nothing short of apocalyptic. The ministry, the International Confederation, even the Wizengamot sent commendations, medals, and invitations. Ted politely declined the Wizengamot seat. "Invite Professor Snape instead," he joked. After the rebellion, Ted and Snape visited Dumbledore at the Rift Valley in the Alps. Since Ted's last visit, 2 tall towers had been added, many workers swarming over them, and a gigantic blue magic dome now blanketed surrounding peaks. From the towers and through great arrays, volleys of pure magical power rained down into the rift, killing otherworldly insect-like monsters that crawled up from the abyss. Dumbledore stood at the front line with the Elder Wand, directing the assaults and shredding those creatures. He had been fighting here for months, rotating between the towers and the front. Every day the monsters surged in 3 waves, morning, noon, and night. Dumbledore, a centenarian, kept fighting for hours. That he held the line was miraculous. The International Confederation had invested heavily, towers, mages, magic crystals, because if Dumbledore hadn't held, entire countries would have been overrun. Meanwhile, Lord Voldemort took advantage of the distraction. He stirred trouble in Eastern Europe, occupying countries and placing Death Eaters in control. Hospitals, governance, the upper classes, the statute of secrecy meant little to him. In Africa, Grindelwald conquered, defeated the creature called the King of the Savannah, stripped a lion of its true name, and banished it into a magical wardrobe world. He had purged many opponents and consolidated much of the African magical world. Muggle scientists warned of abnormal sunspots and magnetic storms. Meteorologists predicted a terrible summer in Eastern Europe, snow in June. The small era was over, the great era was coming. And somewhere, in the private channels of the game system, a notification blinked. Thanks for playing, I'm offline. 100-point reward granted. Ding. Talent Otherworld Knowledge. Gold. Triggered. Discovered Deckard Cain's Runeword Manual. Purple. Deckard Cain's Runeword Manual. Purple. Deckard Cain, the last Horadrim sage, was a master of the hidden history and lore of Sanctuary and could offer invaluable advice. He was eventually killed by Magda, a servant of Belial, the Lord of Lies. He left behind a precious manual detailing powerful runeword combinations. Exchange requires 3,600 experience points. Wow, purple quality knowledge. And it's about runewords. I saved that old man so many times in Diablo 2. Ted felt a rush of excitement when the Otherworld knowledge popped up for June. Runewords, advanced runology that creates potent magical effects by arranging and combining individual runes. This was very useful, absolutely worth trading for. He spent the experience points, and a string of mysterious purple runes drifted from the sky into his mind. He drank in the centuries of wisdom and experience accumulated by Sanctuary's mages and sages. Useful. Comprehensive. Fantastic. First, give the alchemy table a minus 15% reagent requirement. Then add an effect to greatly increase the chance of getting magical items. Give his wand +3 to all skills. Craft a Raven-exclusive necklace, chest armor, for Ansu and engrave a level 14 Raven runeword effect. Give Hermione a minus 20% mana consumption effect. There were so many possibilities it made his head spin. Of course, crafting runes required resources. It would take time. Maybe he could convert that mass-produced wand workshop into a low-level rune factory. The workers were already there. While Ted schemed and planned, and even toyed with the idea of introducing this world to a rune system, the Ministry of Magic was busy with post-war reconstruction. More pressingly, it was June and Hogwarts was about to break for summer. The OWLs were coming up. Exams could not be skipped, even in the middle of history. This was the 5th year. The ordinary wizarding levels at term's end were crucial. They determined which students could move on to Newt-level courses in the 6th year. In the original stories, Snape only taught potions to students who had achieved excellent OWL grades in potions. Others weren't allowed to continue. The OWLs were a lot like a high-stakes standardized test. Ron and Jerry were thrilled. 5 years of torment were almost over. No one delayed. Even fresh from the stress of the Goblin Rebellion, the students plunged into intense revision. Hermione kept notebooks by her pillow and revised into the night. Ron put a textbook on his forehead while trying to nap, joking about some Muggle theory that knowledge migrates to areas of lower density. It was ridiculous and very magical. Ted teased Hermione the day before the exams. Hermione, if you keep reciting history of magic like that, you won't get any sleep tonight. He hadn't meant to interrupt her. He was just trying to distract himself from runeword plans. She'd come to him saying she needed to de-stress before the exams, then got distracted. Who did she think she was? Take that. The 5th years were in chaos. Some tried to memorize while eating. Others hunted for technical ways to cheat. Fred and George were about to graduate and, if not for the chaotic year, would have been looking for apprenticeships, mostly because they weren't planning to get jobs. They were planning a business with Ted as angel investor. As some of the oldest students left, they had become unofficial mentors for many younger classmates. Fred, did you ever have any reliable technical tricks? Someone asked. You know us. We were busy dealing with rebellious goblins earlier and missed revision. We sacrificed our grades for the prosperity and peace of the magical world. George said with mock solemnity. So, do you have that kind of method? What kind of method? Cheating? Come on, let us introduce our new product. They'd been thinking about prank toys, magic props, and other goods, but the niche market of cheating devices was unexpectedly enticing. Why not make another fortune before leaving school? On June 3rd, the OWLs began. They ran from 9:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. for 2 weeks in the Great Hall. Mornings were written exams, afternoons practicals. Astronomy had a late-night practical. Examiners came from the Ministry of Magic's Wizarding Examinations Authority, including a formidable older woman who was said to have invigilated Dumbledore himself. Long-lived people were common in the magical world. Ordinary folk could live past 100, and those with stronger talents might reach 150. Potions and magics that prolonged life were common enough that immortality wasn't the obsessing goal outsiders imagined. Because the Goblin Rebellion had damaged the Ministry, staff killed or injured, this year's exams were put together a bit hastily. But the schedule held. The 4 house tables had been moved aside and replaced with single desks, all facing the professor's table. On the invigilator's table, besides spare quills, ink bottles, and parchment, sat a gigantic hourglass to time the exam. The papers were enchanted with the strictest anti-cheating charms. No animated answering quills, no memory balls, no detachable cuff inserts, no auto-correcting ink. At the end, invigilators would summon the parchments with Accio exam papers. Cheating was difficult. After decades, the Ministry had seen every trick. This year brought a new threat: the covert magic tattoos that Ted had developed as login clients for the two-way mirror. They hid beneath the skin and gave off no magic signature when dormant, which made them hard to detect. Fred and George had another plan using the Magic Net Utopia as their transmission system. The idea was clever and dangerously modern. They intended to have candidates use tattoos to scan questions, then have the twins outside search for answers and send them back through the Ideal Land's internal communications. Robards, newly assigned to head the Magic Net Management Office, an office Ted had suggested creating to supervise the emerging Magic Net and virtual lands, made this his first task. With Ted's help, Robards was assembling a new team to handle just these issues. When the twins' transmissions were monitored, an anomaly was found. The tattoos themselves were undetectable, but the source of the outgoing messages was located: the Weasley twins. 2 professors went after them. Fred and George took off on broomsticks inside the castle and even set off firework dragons to cover their escape. They weren't caught in the end, but Professor McGonagall made it clear that refusing to return for punishment, cleaning toilets for a month, would cost them their diplomas. Would the twins really risk not graduating? The 2-week exam period passed quickly. Students usually only took 6 to 8 subjects out of 12, depending on earlier elective choices. Many left relaxed, some wandered dazed. What did I even write? Did I cast an engorgement charm and set the beetle on fire? Was that invigilator knocked down by my Accio? It was a growth charm. Why did mushrooms grow on the potatoes? OWL results were categorized in 5 grades: outstanding, O exceeds expectations, E acceptable, A poor, P dreadful, D. Fred and George insisted there was a 6th worst grade, T for troll. Results would be posted in mid-July, delivered by OWL. Oddly, students sometimes preferred failing to getting an acceptable. A failing mark meant a chance to retake and aim for O or E. An A was a mediocre pass that didn't impress. Generally, only O or E grades allowed students to continue to Newt-level study. A student with all A's would have no classes to attend, an early graduation of sorts. When the exams finished, relief spread through Hogwarts. The end-of-year feast was scheduled for the next day, then the holidays. Ted and Hermione planned that after the break, he'd stay at her home for a week or 10 days, then they'd travel the world. No firm plans, just see where fate took them. They thought they'd visit Jerry's home, the Ironhammer Fortress, and perhaps the Elven Valley of Flowers, then travel abroad. Wizard travel was delightfully easy. The Flu Network and Portkeys beat Muggle planes and trains. The day after lunch, many were already laying out clothes for the feast. They were no longer children. Now image mattered. Boys cast scouring charms and donned house elf ironed suits. Ron prepared his most formal knight's magical armor. Girls took 2 hours at least with dresses and makeup. Evening fell as preparations finished. The great hall glittered with green, blue, red, and yellow decorations for the 4 houses, and the professors gathered at their table smiling. Dumbledore was absent, still needed elsewhere, but he would surely come to next year's welcome feast. After the stress of the rebellion, the sight of everyone healthy and happy at the feast was a small miracle. The house elves were eager to show off their culinary magic. Hogwarts cuisine was famous, and there was always a vote for the best dish. Many house elves hoped to be remembered in school history for a signature recipe. Students had even suggested a new Hufflepuff elective in culinary arts. Magical chefs were in demand. The feast lasted about an hour and a half. With a flick of Professor McGonagall's wand, the long tables were moved aside, and the hall became a buffet and dance floor with a small stage in the center. As usual, Ted was to perform. He wore a tuxedo and bow tie Hermione had chosen, a private, handmade muggle suit she'd bought with half a year's savings. Ted grinned. Clever entrepreneurs were already making money in the magical world, like Jerry and Ron. "I make the game, and you two run a studio to fleece me, huh?" he joked. Hermione had done academic research and sold papers to save some money. She'd spent it on Ted's suit. Ted stepped onto the stage and summoned a piano. He'd learned a few days' worth of piano for tonight. With his high intelligence, picking up the piece wasn't a problem. "On the last day of 5th year, I'll sing Right Here Waiting for Everyone. See you next semester." He began, "Oceans apart, day after day, and I slowly go insane. I hear your voice on the line, but it doesn't ease the pain. How long till we meet again? Can we be separated forever? Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you." The melody and the lyrics carried the end of a turbulent, exhausting year into something quiet and hopeful. The next day, as Ted and his friends left the school, he noticed a short item tucked away in a corner of the Daily Prophet. Former ministry official and education inspector Dolores Umbridge has been imprisoned for her role in former Minister Fudge's conspiracy to subvert wizarding governance. She was sentenced to 6.5 years in Azkaban. According to an inside source, Umbridge was initially considered for leniency due to pregnancy, but she reportedly requested an abortion so she could accept the punishment. Fate's wheel turns like a watermill. Those who were high yesterday are brought low today. Cervantes, Don Quixote. End of this volume. 434. Protagonist information. Ted Epiphany, as of chapter 414. Level, Wizard 16, Mind Mage 10. Experience pool, 105,900. Talent, minus 10% experience required to level up. Ideal land provides 1,000 points daily. Attributes, Strength 7, Plun from Bracer, plus 4 from Newt. Constitution 8, plus 2 from Philosopher's Stone, plus 6 from Newt. Agility 7, plus 1 from Spiderwalk Shoes, plus 5 from Newt. Intelligence 11, plus 2 from Spirit Crystal Servant. Perception 10, plus 1 from Wand, plus 2 from Spirit Crystal Servant, plus 1 from Dazzle Ring. Spirit 25, plus 2 from Philosopher's Stone, plus 3 from Spirit Crystal Servant. Charm 9, Luck. Reputation, not listed. Talents, Otherworld Knowledge, Gold. Study God, Purple. Sound of Heartbeat, Red. Fog of Fate, Red. Unequal Exchange, Orange. Mind Resonance, Purple. Magic Conversion, Purple. Magic Shaping, Red. Otherworld Knowledge, Library of Collected Texts. Year 1, Mind Power Manual, Fragment, Blue. Dalaran Jr., Canon Fodder Mage, crossed out. Battle Mage Training Manual, green. Sule, Pow Bubble Alchemy Recipe Notes, green. 3-Ring Red Robe Wizard Penny's Spellbook, blue. Filthy Priest's Shameless Mind. Theft Investigation File, green. Black Secret Technique. Raven Ninjutsu Scroll, green. Method for Making Lone Wolf's Ashes. Shinobi Prosthetic Creation Blueprint. Traveler's Delicious Recipes, green. Year 2, Official Trainer Pokemon Cultivation Manual, green. Crafting Specialty Book. Flame Village Cat Meal Recipe Collection. Druid Transformation Research, blue. Taoist Knowledge, red. Soldier 76 Tactical Goggles R&D Manual, green. Zen Garden Plant Cultivation Techniques, green. Great Quail's Way of Magic Nourishment, blue. Otherworld Reincarnated Slime, green. Spirit Steed Whistle, green. Love and Monster Compendium, green. Advanced Alchemist Balduran's Alchemy Notes. Year 3, Steel Alchemy, red. Healer Hero Job Guidance Book, green. Flame Breathing Basic Method, green. The Power of the Holy Light, blue. Gnome Engineering Nearly Invincible Belt Blueprint, blue. Autonomous Cursed Corpse Creation Attempt Scroll, green. Witcher Potion Compendium, green. Steel Sword Slays Evil, Silver Sword Eradicates Demons, Flesh Sword Subdues Witches. Sheikah Slate Creation Method, blue. T-Virus Map, green. Abandoned. Birth of Biodemon Zack, Scarecrow's Fear Gas Recipe. Brief Discussion on Dragon Slaying Magic, blue. Year 4, Astartes Monk Gene Modification Manual, Witcher Mutation Evolution and Sign Compendium, red. My World Alchemy Table Blueprint. Chimera Technique Research Note. Dragon Shout Diagram, Unrelenting Force, blue. Things Light Won't Tell You. Sitting and Forgetting DAO Layout Notes, red. Abandoned. Ready Player One Oasis Virtual World Source Code. Space Capsule R&D Notes. Scarlet Crusade, Undead Torture Manual, green. Magic, Sword of Sealing Light, Destroy All-Seeing Goggles Engineering Blueprint. Year 5, Broken Hidden Leaf Village Sealing Scroll, purple. Metal Gear Nanoparticle Manufacturing Process Diagram, blue. Little Yama's Spirit Orb Development Manual, Nine Heavens Secret Scroll, Rui Treasure Scroll, Rubbing Incomplete, purple. Way of Guile, red. Healing Church Blood Healing Potion Recipe, blue. Abandoned, Akatsuki Ninjutsu Scroll, red. Night at the Museum, Pharaoh's Gold Tablet, purple. Middle-earth Ring Forging, purple. Kenneth L. Malloy Archibald's Magic Notes, red. Poneglyph, blue. Deckard Cain's Rune Word Manual, purple. Skills, Magic Level 9, +1 from Philosopher's Stone. Magic Resistance Level 7. Magic Penetration Level 7. Spellcasting Level 9. Mind Power Level 9. Mental Resistance Level 5. Transfiguration, Levels Potions, Level 5. Prophecy Level 3. Herbology, Level 4. Dark Arts Level 6. Magical Creatures Level 6. Bloodline Modification Level 8. Ancient Runes, Level 6. Alchemy Level 7, +1 from Philosopher's Stone. Spells, omitted. Psionics, omitted. Cards, spell cards, restore stamina, green. Consumes a small amount of magic to restore a portion of expended stamina. Cooldown, 4 hours. Ravenclaw's Wisdom, blue, +2 intelligence, +1 spirit for 1 hour. Cooldown, 12 hours. Gravity Ball, blue, releases a gravity ball that deals area damage on impact and can temporarily alter the target's gravity direction. Note, consumes a large amount of magic. Anticipate, blue. After use, psionics are exceptionally active for 10 minutes, greatly increasing the chance to react in advance to sneak attacks and unexpected events. Cooldown, 6 hours. Celebrity, green, +2 charm for 30 minutes. Cooldown, 12 hours. Promotion, red, temporarily boosts one of your summoned units. Lasts 10 minutes. Cooldown, 24 hours. Note, the boost may not always be favorable. Punishment, deals a large amount of true damage to non-human targets and restores a portion of your health, stamina, and magic. Cooldown, 24 hours. Flash, red, no description provided in source. Basilisk Skin, blue, transforms your skin into tough basilisk scales, making you hard to injure and granting +2 magic resistance. Lasts 5 minutes. Cooldown, 5 hours. Note, a scaly body doesn't look very friendly. Mind Agony, red, inflicts terrifying mental agony on sentient targets, dealing dual damage to spirit and body. Cooldown, 30 minutes. Note, soul-piercing mental pain. Poacher, blue, no description provided in source. Warrior's Proof, blue, magic card. Attempts to turn a unit into a warrior, uses 1/1. Note, requires special qualities. Failure chance increases otherwise. Flip Trap, green, no detailed description in source. False Scales, blue, weakens an enemy attribute and strengthens your own. Telekinetic Crystal Wall, red, summons a telekinetically materialized crystal wall with extremely strong defensive effects. Extreme Maze Spell, red, banishes the target into a massive planar maze. The target cannot escape unless they find an exit or 10 hours pass. Cooldown, 30 days. Note, ensure the target cannot move when casting. 7 Trials, purple, sends the target into a trial of 7 stages. Completing each stage grants a massive amount of experience. Uses 3/3. Note, if you fail a stage, you cannot continue to later stages. Extract Elemental Essence, red, extracts corresponding elemental essence from nature or raw materials. Requires Alchemy, level 5. Self-service Gringotts, purple, randomly draws a treasure from the vault of this magical Gringotts. Cooldown, 30 days. Call for magic support, red, summons an Auror squad to fight for you for 30 minutes. Cooldown, 7 days. Item cards, Self-Destruct, Charging Fire Pig, blue, summons a giant fiery wild boar that charges enemies and explodes on disappearance. Lasts 30 seconds. Cooldown, 10 hours. Note, easily causes friendly fire. Mysterious Dance Flute, green, plays a mysterious flute, attracting surrounding creatures to dance along with the music. Tracking Snowball, green, transforms into an auto-flying, target-tracking snowball. Tracking time, 3 minutes. Cooldown, 10 minutes. Sturdy Love Doll. No description provided in source. Dragon Firework, green. Summons a massive dragon formed by magic with basic consciousness that actively seeks enemies, not affected by common counterspells. Lasts 5 minutes. Cooldown, 3 hours. Note it's still a firework, grand in display but limited in destructive power. Forged Lucky Coin, green. Increases magic by 20% for 3 minutes. Cooldown, 8 hours. Note, effect reduced for targets above level 8. Transformation Candy, green. Transforms you into an unexpected form. Quantity, 10 tens pieces. Cooldown, restores 1 piece per hour. Wobbly Tiger, green. Places a wobbly tiger. Duration, 30 minutes. Cooldown, 1 hour. Heartbeat Firework. Releases fireworks, creating a large pink heart. Everyone who sees it experiences a momentary heartbeat. Uses 1-1. Note, that is not love. Moonlight Stone, green. Draws a wisp of moonlight to follow the target, making its glow dazzling. Lasts 3 minutes. Cooldown 1 hour. Stamina Scroll, green, +2 constitution. Uses Festival Petals, green. Envelops nearby targets in fluttering festival petals. Yellow Springs Bottle, blue. A bottle that can continuously pour Yellow Springs water. Capricorn Fruit, red. A fruit resembling a closed eye that can absorb negative emotions of intelligent beings and parasitize them into monsters. Magic Sealing Chains, red. Iron chains that seal the target's magic. Note, a good cage. Strong Orc Cultivation Tank, red. Places a tank that produces 30 strong orcs of random professions and traits at a rate of 1 per minute. Lasts 6 hours. Cooldown, 7 days. Note, ugly and brutal but useful. The randomness is a major instability. Equipment Cards, Ghost Cloak, green. Equip, disguises you as a ghost for silent movement. Note, visual disguise only. You cannot pass through walls. Apothecary's Gloves, blue. Equip, +1 potions level. Note, does not affect potions level 5 and above due to quality limits. Troll Strength Bracer, blue. A bracer braided from troll hide, +1 strength. Note, ineffective if strength exceeds 20. Pseudo-Philosopher's Stone, red. Equip bonuses, +2 magic, +1 alchemy level, 2 constitution, 2 spirit. Greatly increases health and magic recovery speed. Use once a month to permanently transmute base metals, max 10 x 10 x 10 centimeters, into gold. Note, a high-quality replica of a great alchemy product. Spiderwalk Shoes, equip, +1 agility, allows walking on walls and ceilings. Note, wall walking requires strong core muscles and not being too heavy. Dizzying Eye, blue, equip, +1 perception, increases sensitivity to light and vision. Dazzle ability consumes a small amount of magic to cause dizziness in targets you make eye contact with. Note, wearing an eyeball ring is conspicuous. Emerald Ring, green, equip, +1 acid resistance, can use spray acid 3 times day, strong acid arrow 2 times day, and acid mist 1 time day. Fireproof Cloak, equip, +2 fire resistance. Note, fire resistance level A+. Fire Treading Boots, green, equip 1 fire resistance. Flame Jet, sprays flames and grants an extreme charge speed for 12 seconds. Note, once the jet starts, it cannot be stopped. Do not use indoors. Ring of Flame Energy, blue, equip, +1 fire resistance, +2 fire mastery. Grants the spells Ignite 3 day, Repulse Fire Ring 3 day, and Rain of Fire 1 day. Flame Storm Amulet, blue, can trigger the combustion shield, +2 fire resistance, absorbs damage, burns physical attackers. Upon breaking, creates a flame shockwave. Warm Heart Emblem, blue, equip, +25% magic recovery. Warmth 75% magic recovery for 3 minutes. Fire Patterned Obsidian Dagger, blue, physical attacks deal bonus fire damage. Blade of Flame ignites the weapon to ignore 1 level of magic resistance. Flame Jet sprays a tongue of fire to burn enemies. Note, use with caution. Orb of Flame, equip, +3 fire resistance, +3 fire mastery. Grants permanent scorching aura, continuous burns to enemies within 50 meters. Flame Ray emits numerous flame rays that automatically attack enemies, dealing double damage to enemies suffering ignite or burn. Summon Fire Element. Summons 2 level 10 fire elementals for 5 minutes. Note, made from the core of a magma giant. Poacher's Knife, green. No description provided in source. Crying Twins Shoulder Guards, blue. A pair of black iron shoulder guards formed by the faces of a crying boy and girl. Can emit cries and glare at enemies. Brute Bullhead, blue. A brass-horned helmet. Wearing it allows a single charge that knocks back enemies several times heavier than oneself. Ted considered whether to give it to Neville or Harry. Material cards. Warrior, blue, represents extraordinary courage, a special trait, possibly used as a material for strengthening summon cards. Stone Spirit, green, represents the spirituality of rock. Fire Particles, white, high combustion coal, white, essence of flame, green, blazing core, green, flame accelerant, green, black iron ore, green, essence of flame, red, concentrated essence of a magma giant containing large amounts of high-quality flame magic, very precious. Land cards, Mountain Peak, blue, underground lava river, blue, village, Grungeon, red, blood pool, blue, a large pond made of foul blood. Colosseum, place a Colosseum, the strong survive, the weak perish. Forbidden forest, a dark forbidden forest, do not enter. Black Lake, red, aquatic magic creatures breed here. If mishandled, they can come ashore. Demon Lord's Castle, unfinished underworld, Tower of Babel, Wizard Village, red, places a wizard village that automatically generates shops and refreshes residents. Geomantic Magic Net Hub, red, places a hub that extends deep underground, providing magic power for formations, magical buildings, and magical areas. Note, Ted lacks only a castle card to be able to open a school. Summon cards, Armored Troll, Granite Golem, blue, Hog, the Knoll Chieftain. Level, Jackalware 9, Elite Unit 3, Magic Creature 1. Jackalware Chieftain 1 Attributes, Strength 15, Constitution 18, Agility 10, Intelligence 7, Perception 8, Spirit 7, Charisma 5, Luck, Talents, Cunning, green, +2 Intelligence, Superior Cunning for a Jackalware. Elite Unit, green, +1 Strength, Constitution, Agility, Tall, green, +1 Strength, 1 Constitution. Sharp Fangs and Claws, green, deals higher physical damage. Ferocious, green, highly skilled and efficient in combat. Jackalware Prestige, blue, natural prestige among Jackalware, deterrent and leadership over some evil creatures. Commander, red, commands subordinates in battle. Equipment, excellent wolfskin armor, green, inner armor that reduces physical damage. Chitin armor, green, full body armor with excellent physical defense and +1 magic resistance. Heavy chain hammer, green, one-handed hammer with a chance to land a heavy blow. Cruel axe, green, one-handed axe with a chance to dismember. Skills, bestial howl, level 5, induces frenzy in himself and subordinates, +1 strength, 1 constitution, +1 agility, 20% move and attack speed, increased physical damage. Chance to make enemies flee. Summon minions, level 4, summons 4 Jackalware brutes, 3 Jackalware spearmen, 2 bone-eating hyenas, 1 Jackalware poison crossbowman, 1 Jackalware lurking assassin, 1 Jackalware watchman. Taunt, level 3, provokes enemies, passive intimidation present. Chain hammer mastery, level 3, one-handed axe mastery, level 3, sprint charge, level 3. Stone skin, level 2, greatly reduces physical damage. Lightning shield, level 2, envelops himself in a lightning shield. Vampiric strike, level 2, next attack deals 300% lifesteal. Shockwave, level 2, releases a fan-shaped shockwave. Magic, level 2, magic resistance, level 2. Lasso Entangle, level 1, throws a lasso to entangle enemies. Throw Boomerang Wolf Tooth Disc, level 1, ranged boomerang attack. Evaluation, an elite Jackalware chieftain from a high magic otherworld not to be underestimated. Raptor Squad, blue, Ghost Nun, red, summons a Ghost Nun to fight for you. Aerial Corpsefish, red, summons 2 giant devouring corpsefish for 60 minutes. Cooldown, 10 hours. Abilities, levitate, float in air as if in water, undead, carry potent corpse poison, devour, consume living and dead matter to evolve, corpseworm ghost hand, abilities of corpse worms and ghost hands. Evaluation, ruthless devouring machines. Death Rock Band, blue, summons your Death Rock Band for 3 hours. Cooldown, 3 days. Effects, dance partner summons fan zombies, hippie, allied units ignore pain and become fanatical. Stage, summons a bone stage to block disruption. Curse, music brings various curses to unappreciative enemies. Call to arms, units that die within the concert join the band. Evaluation, a crossover superstar. Brotherhood of Bones, red, summons Brotherhood members to assassinate targets. Duration, until target is killed or all members die. Cooldown, 10 hours if target is killed, 7 days if all are wiped out. Murloc Tidehunter, summons a Murloc Tidehunter for 30 minutes. Cooldown, 10 hours. Murloc Tidehunter, level 3 Murloc, Elite Unit 3 high, Tidehunter attributes. Strength 8, Constitution 11, Agility 10, Intelligence 4, perception 6, spirit 4, charisma 4, luck. Talents: aquatic species green, elite unit green, tidehunter green. Equipment: fishbone spear, fish scale armor white. Skills: summon murloc scout, warlord's warcree, tidal wave impact, tidal shell, salty fish stab. Evaluation: a formidable tide-walking hunter among murlocs. End of document. Chapter 4 and 35, asking for leave, trying out a new game. Dear, Mr. Granger, take off those awful gaming glasses. Dinner's ready. Mrs. Granger's call, unanswered twice, finally erupted through the house. Oh, coming. I'll be right there. Hey, Monica, you won't believe what I found. A huge treasure chest. I'll show you after dinner. You'll love it. Mr. Granger scrambled to make amends, slipping his headset off sheepishly. Playing games while his wife cooked was always dangerous. Mrs. Granger planted her hands on her hips. If you can't satisfy me, you'll be eating a week's worth of stargazy pie. Mr. Granger hoped she was joking. Ted, meanwhile, had started trying to let muggles into the ideal land. Muggles had no innate magic, but he could provision them with magic or set up ley line towers nearby. So far, only a handful of muggles could access the Magic World network. Key figures, officials from various countries, and the Grangers. Their presence was kept hidden from ordinary wizard players. After all, wizards were an eccentric bunch, and the early days of this virtual magic world had left many bewildered and isolated. Ted's ambition was huge. Relying only on the million wizards and other magical races put a hard cap on growth. If he brought in 6 billion muggles, the potential would become limitless. The difficulties were enormous, but he could try step by step. The old separation of the magical and muggle worlds was becoming unsustainable. Within the International Confederation of Wizards, there was constant debate about whether the Statute of Secrecy should remain. The magic world was in frequent turmoil. Ministries were overwhelmed. Earlier this year, the Goblin Rebellion had crippled the British Ministry of Magic, leaving it short-staffed and unable to maintain the old order. Citizens protested in the streets, furious at strange occurrences and at officials who clearly knew more than they admitted. If not for the residual prestige of the crown, things might already have escalated further. Other regions weren't far behind. In Southeast Asia, institutions were barely holding together. Resources were scarce, and public safety couldn't be assured. It was all but cohabitation between humans and magical creatures. People were even taming dinosaurs. North America had its own problems. Superheroes and supervillains fought in the streets every day. In places like Los Santos, dozens of super encounters could be witnessed in a single day, flattening cars and terrorizing pedestrians. Spectators loved the spectacle. Some cheered, some provoked, some boasted of destroying cities. Prices and markets were being driven mad by these clashes. And then there were the global catastrophes, incidents that kept the likes of Dumbledore busy. In the Alps, wizards had spent months killing hundreds of thousands of strange insects pouring out of mountain fissures. If unchecked, these things could be far worse than dinosaurs. The artificial barrier between the magic world and the muggle world would inevitably be breached. The merging of both sides felt like an unavoidable result of all intelligent species banding together for survival. So Ted had begun to try to steer muggles into accepting the magic world by letting them ease in through the game. Dinner at the Grangers was abundant. British cuisine might have a reputation for being plain, but Mrs. Granger had learned many magical recipes from Ted that muggles could actually cook. That made her something of a neighborhood celebrity among the other local women, more famous, in some circles, than her dentistry ever made her. The Grangers were eager to finish and open Ted's promised treasure chest, so Ted and Hermione ate heartily. The couple weren't surprised by Ted's appetite, but Hermione's sudden ravenousness puzzled them. Mrs. Granger later joked, "The magic world's water must be nourishing everyone." Ted grinned and said, "That's me losing out to nurture her." After a few quick bites, the Grangers left the table. No one could resist a new world, especially one of infinite possibility. The two had recently become absorbed by the magic world. Mr. Granger, who was 1.85 meters tall in real life, chose an 80-centimeter tall gnome character, determined to be a crafty magic thief. Mrs. Granger, graceful and clever in real life, apparently tired of her everyday image, picked a female barbarian over 2 meters tall. She carried an axe the size of a wagon wheel, had two throwing axes at her waist, and Mr. Granger's character sat on her shoulder. Their typical combat routine was to throw the throwing axes, then toss Mr. Granger, and then charge in to hack at everything that moved. Mr. Granger mostly hid under his wife's character to deal damage. After they finished dinner, Ted and Hermione settled on the sofa together to watch TV. Television loved spectacle. For ratings, many hosts and cameramen streamed live explorations of places said to be strange. Most were staged for entertainment, but occasionally reckless teams actually went to dangerous sites. Just yesterday, Ted and Hermione had watched a live stream from Fairy Lake outside the city. Mid-broadcast, the feed went haywire when a cameraman was grabbed by something and pulled away, leaving the hostess screaming. He'd been rescued hours later by a local special unit, a hybrid of special forces and wizards, and afterward he gushed about an incredible dreamlike place he didn't want to leave. Do you know? That kind of earthly paradise. You can't understand. I want to go back, he cried. A producer slapped him into reality. Look at yourself. You've shrunk to the size of a refugee in 8 hours. Go back, you'd be dead by tomorrow. Know your limits. The incident had been live-streamed, thousands watched. Such events were increasingly common. People knew things weren't normal, but life went on, like hearing a war is happening in a far country. You talk about it, worry about it, but you keep living. After a while, Ted and Hermione went back to their rooms. They had to pack. The next day they were setting off. Hogwarts had a tradition of graduation trips to broaden horizons, but it hadn't been observed for decades. Ted and Hermione planned to travel now before their graduation, uncertain what the world would be like later. Ted planned to craft a wand, but obtaining suitable materials was a problem, so they would visit the 3 major global magic material markets. Before they left, Mrs. Granger called Hermione in for a private mother-daughter talk. "My darling, I'm so happy you found your own happiness, but your father and I didn't think you'd leave so soon. Mom, I'm not getting married. It's pretty close. We'll be back in 2 or 3 weeks. One thing. Before you graduate, I don't want to be holding any grandchildren." Got it. The world's 3 major magic material markets were the Witchcraft Market in Sonora, Mexico, the Sacrifice Market in Togo, West Africa, and the Magic Bazaar on Phuket Island, Thailand. The Sacrifice Market in Africa was recognized as the largest of them all. A weekly bazaar awash with primitive witchcraft, curios, enchanted items, magic materials, and strange unknowns. Almost any magic material could be bought there. It was also the closest to Ted and Hermione, so they chose to go. Going to Africa meant entering Grindelwald's territory. Grindelwald, Professor Geller, had been startlingly effective. Within 2 or 3 months of taking effective control of parts of Africa, he'd reorganized the magic world there. Africa had more wizards than any other continent, but tribal conflicts and centuries of resentment had left the magical communities chaotic. Even students at Ouagadougou, the continent's great school, held long-standing grudges. Grindelwald used his authority, charisma, and, when necessary, ruthless force to mediate, maneuver, and sometimes eliminate factions to restore order. When Ted heard about it, he couldn't help admiring the results. "You're ruthless when you need to be," he said. "You wouldn't be calling me Hannibal then," Grindelwald replied with a wry smile. He seemed magnanimous and open, but when he decided to remove an enemy, he left nothing to chance. He began with a few elderly, respected saints and built a wider, younger, more effective following. His direct circle numbered over 600 skilled wizards. Agencies under his influence were triple that. With Ouagadougou under his governance, graduating students returning to their peoples would reinforce his authority. In raw organizational power, Grindelwald was formidable. Many thought stronger than Dumbledore in certain respects. Voldemort, by contrast, had long since given up. Grindelwald welcomed Ted warmly. He admired Ted's creativity and the way he was changing the magic world. "I've heard about the goblin situation," he said. "Not a big deal. I think they should all be eliminated, but your approach makes sense. Those are minor matters." Then his eyes brightened. "What amazes me is the ideal land. My people have thought along similar lines, but we always miss the core. Our constructs lack function." Ted thought, of course, the core of ideal land was psychically driven. Without that core, no matter how ornate the magical scaffolding, nothing would work. like optimizing code without an engine. So your presence is perfect. I want you to set up a geodetic magic web across Africa, cover the whole continent. Grindelwald was generous. The ideal land was Ted's domain, and sealing Africa with it would be an immense expense and cede substantial control. That he asked spoke to his priorities, results over ego. Ted smiled. Of course, no problem, Professor. Since you trust me, let's begin. It would be foolish not to seize such an opportunity. Grindelwald didn't care about who led so long as the job got done. As for the wand materials, Grindelwald warned them the sacrifice market might disappoint. If you want a custom wand comparable to the Elder Wand, he said, you'll be unhappy. The market has many things, but few of high grade. You won't find Elder Wand materials there. Ted laughed. Professor, I'm not making an Elder Wand. Still, since they were nearby, they wanted to look. Saturday was market day. Entry required a magic ticket, costing 1 sickle. Without it, you couldn't pass through. Half that sickle likely went straight to Grindelwald's administration as tax. The ticket itself was clever, a one-use portkey that only worked through an odd gate made of raw logs. Holding their tickets, faintly glowing, Ted and Hermione stepped through and arrived in a different world. The market was immediate and crowded. Wizards treated commerce casually. Some simply laid a magic carpet on the ground and set up shop in the middle of a main thoroughfare. The whole market sprawled like an open plateau at the foot of a cliff. There were no real streets. Wherever people could walk was the road. Stalls and tents dotted the landscape. Those who made a living at it clustered together. Ore vendors with piles of colorful metals and raw gems and veins of magic. Animal sellers with cages of squawking, strange magical creatures, many reeking of odd scents. Chickens flew, dogs leapt, and crowds formed around things no one had seen before. Languages swirled. A simple comprehend languages spell made listening, speaking, reading, and writing effortless. Roughly 80% of African magical commerce passed through this place. 2,000 or 3,000 people, vendors and buyers, filled the area. Ted and Hermione needed time to adjust. Even Ted, who'd seen much of the magic world, wasn't prepared for this. The wares were extraordinary. Dried venomous snakes, some preserved as charms, baboon skulls with ghostly faces, wooden human head sculptures hammered full of nails, and countless objects clearly tied to dark arts. It lived up to its name, the sacrifice market. Dark arts and voodoo material were openly sold. There were also live things and curios no one dared touch. Some items gave off intense magical fluctuations that clearly weren't native to this world. Ted spent 200 galleons on several raw gemstone ores and a piece of associated mithril ore, a modest haul. Gemstone value lay not only in the stone, but in the cutting. Mithril required painstaking alchemy to extract. For someone else, it might have been a bad investment, but for Ted, it had potential. He did not find any purple quality materials. There were odd red stones and many items that looked like they came from another reality, too hazardous for many buyers. Some stalls sold clearly dangerous artifacts. A serpent-shaped magic dagger, a foot long, lay coiled on a table. Anyone who touched it risked it coming alive and biting, which would bind them into a terrible magical contract. Another vendor displayed a pitch-black iron needle as thick as a finger and a foot long. Its inscription said it required fresh white bones to feed it. A careless prick might have one's bones painfully drawn out. Sinister items were everywhere. After a couple of laps, they found a few useful curios and saw many unique voodoo materials, some gruesome enough to be sold only behind curtains. Nothing, however, suited wand-making needs. Still, Grindelwald later offered some encouraging news. There was an eye elder in Angola. Ted actually had the wand materials in his hand. It was the horn of a black forest spirit he'd obtained in Sweden and Norway last year. This wasn't ordinary. The black forest spirit had been in a juvenile, natural form. If it hadn't wandered into this world and remained maladapted, it wouldn't have been easy to kill. The horn concentrated its nature-transforming power, a top-tier wand material. The heart, which concentrated most of its magic, had been given to Fleur. Compared to the horn, the heart conformed more closely to the magic world's rules and was easier to use. Ted had considered making a wand out of the horn back then. Along with the horn of nature, he had 77 grams of refined mithril left over from making the moon marrow spirit liquid. This refined mithril had been processed from 10 times the normal amount. The result was a head-sized mercury-like blob that could, under human control, exhibit two opposite properties: internal magic superconductivity and external magic insulation. Ted had inherited much of his arcane knowledge from director Kenneth in the Type Moon world, and had a solid grounding in non-combat systems, especially magic workshops and tool-making. The Moon Marrow Spirit liquid had been made for Hermione, though Ted had dragged finishing it out until summer because he wanted to engineer some psychic changes. In Ted's plan, he still needed a suitable wand core, a powerful inlay, and a set of runes to bind it. The inlay needed to be a potent magical gem or similar. He'd found half of that already. He'd seen the rest in a vision and only had to return to that place in a month and a half to seize it. He had mastered hundreds of powerful rune languages. He'd choose the set most suited to the wand's character later. The only missing piece was the wand core. He had no clues. That was why he planned to visit the 3 major markets for magic materials. A normal dragon heartstring would be too weak for the wand he envisioned. Dragons were already among the most potent magical creatures in this world, and there was little stronger. That left something from another world. Grindelwald had mentioned an elder beholder, something from another world. Ted had killed beholders in Europe before. These grotesque monsters, spherical flesh, one huge central eye, a mouth with dagger-like fangs, tentacles sprouting from their heads, ending in small eyeballs, could make anyone with trypophobia sick at the sight. They were inherently hostile to other intelligent life. Inherently evil didn't mean moral judgment so much as attitude. They regarded themselves as perfect and everything else as inferior, fit only to be dominated or eaten. Beholders are born with magic. They hover naturally and possess numerous eye rays with varied effects: petrification, disintegration, paralysis, charm. Their rays penetrate magic on multiple levels. A single glare could be fatal. In desperate moments, they could even eat a wizard alive. For wizards, the most dangerous beholder ability was the main eye's anti-magic field. It expelled all magic within a certain radius, making spells evaporate mid-cast and preventing wizards from drawing power from the environment. A level 12 or 13 wizard caught unprepared by such a field might escape if lucky. If not, they'd die. Level 12 to 13 wizards were already the backbone of the magic world. Higher-level wizards were rare. The beholder Ted had faced in Europe killed 4 wizards easily. Grindelwald had spoken of an elder beholder, all-seeing eye, elder eye, Quiasila, an 18th-level elder beholder, an elite. Ted had observed it with a fingernail-sized puppet fly and gathered a lot of intel. The puppet fly was destroyed the next second by the elder eye's gaze, 12 meters away at the time. No wonder it's called all-seeing eye, Ted muttered. The creature's perception stat was a staggering 29, and the anti-magic field on its main eye was red quality. In practical terms, even a Professor McGonagall-level wizard, an elite auror, would be unable to use magic within a 70-meter diameter centered on that elder beholder. It was a magic nullifying zone. That explained why Grindelwald hadn't taken direct action. An 18th-level beast like that could probably be handled only by Grindelwald himself. His wizards would be helpless. The anti-magic field made attacking it a gamble without absolute certainty. But Ted was here. The Elder Beholder had been discovered a month and a half ago. Before that, it had been in this world for nearly half a year. After adapting, it had started scheming. It gathered subordinates in an abandoned underground building under a coastal city in Angola. Kobolds, goblins, some more powerful evil monsters, nearly 200 creatures in total, subjugated under its tyranny. It had even formed an underground cult among the local human population through mind control and dream guidance. Because it could demonstrate real power, it attracted many locals of status and wealth. Angola was desperately poor, and the poor genuinely believed. Within 3 or 4 months, the all-seeing eye cult had spread through the city and even reached the capital. Local wizards investigated, then died, which brought the matter to the saints and the Ministry of Magic, and the trail led back to the Elder Beholder. After an attack failed, the creature had been left alone for over half a month, awaiting Grindelwald. "All right, Professor. I'll take care of this trouble for you," Ted said, taking the case. Grindelwald nodded. Don't push yourself. If you don't want to, I can free up my hands and go myself." Ted smiled and said nothing more. Professor Geller wanted to test his methods and trump cards, but this elder beholder was too tempting a specimen. It was also a serious headache. With the International Confederation of Wizards stretched thin and enforcement of the Statute of Secrecy lax, and with Africa currently under Grindelwald's influence, he could act with a little more freedom, but he couldn't just smash ordinary people in the name of cleaning up. The local zealots would resist, perhaps even attack. The first step had to be dismantling the cult's influence. Fight magic with magic. A mind mage could do what an eye demon did, only better. Level 9 mind power wasn't a joke. Grindelwald wanted the magic network to cover all of Africa. Ted decided to start with Angola. Angola made a brutal first impression. It was poorer and more chaotic than he'd imagined. Decades of colonialism, independence, civil wars, and factional fighting. Outside a few cities, the landscape matched every stereotype. Crude mud houses, dirt roads, bare feet, and wild animals. Yet the country produced oil. The guide Grindelwald sent was a Muggle-born wizard familiar with the region. Ted even saw fellow nationals from the Heavenly Dynasty doing infrastructure work in exchange for oil. The first place Ted struck at the cult's influence was a construction site run by Heavenly Dynasty workers. Li Hao, the project manager, was losing his mind. Local hires weren't working. They prayed for hours, and some even convinced crew members to join that eye cult. As a compatriot, Li Hao instinctively knew something was wrong, but being in a foreign land, he had to tread carefully. The delays were becoming serious. That night, everyone on the site dreamed. Ted avoided heavy-handed mind control. Those methods had side effects. He was here to learn from past mistakes. He crafted a convincing dream and seeded it with suggestions tailor-made for the poor Angolans. The promise of an ideal land after death, a place of peace and purpose if one worked hard now. To men already desperate, the dream felt truer than heaven. Li Hao had the dream too, and at breakfast he and his colleagues gaped. "You had that dream as well?" they said, uneasy. The locals, however, accepted it whole. They rolled up their sleeves and worked harder than ever, sweat shining on skin darker than crude oil. Ted hadn't lied. He offered a path. Diligently practiced the seeds he planted, and one's soul would enter the ideal land after death. Being a peaceful NPC in the ideal land was better than being eaten by a wild monster in the real world. The construction of magic network hubs and radiation towers in the area needed manpower anyway, perfect to hand the project to the Heavenly Dynasty crews. In 3 days, ordinary human followers of the Eye Demon Elder dropped by 60%. Ted didn't bother rounding up the remaining 40%. An eye demon wasn't a god. It couldn't receive faith like a divinity and had no real way of tracking how many followers it had lost. By the time it noticed, Ted had already dismantled its hold among ordinary people. "Your belief is female. It won't hold against my male belief," Ted joked to himself as his plan unfolded. "Hermione, those lesser mooks are yours. When I start, you clear them out," he told her. "Okay, I understand. You're confident, right?" Hermione, anxious after learning about the Elder Beholder, asked. "Don't worry, I'm very confident." The Elder Beholder was much larger than ordinary beholders, over 1.5 meters in diameter. Imagine a huge ball of flesh floating a meter above the ground, covered in dark red, interlocking scales. In the center sat an orange-yellow vertical pupil larger than a human head. Beneath it, a mouth nearly a meter wide bristled with curved fangs. 12 eye stalks as thick as arms and thighs sprouted from the top, each 1 or 2 meters long and ending in a fist-sized eyeball whose pupils varied in shape and color. At first glance, it looked like a crowd of eyes staring at you. As an elder, it had lived long enough to awaken mind and spirit-related abilities. Simply gazing at it could send an ordinary person into paralyzing fear. Even retired warriors would collapse. It projected an inherent fear aura that could blank minds and erase resistance. Its secondary eyes harbored lethal rays, petrification, instant death, disintegration. An 18th level Elder's rays likely penetrated magic at level 5 or 6. Ted's plan was to neutralize its magic entirely. At this moment, he was wearing adamantine inlaid mithril armor and wielding an adamantine-plated tungsten greatsaber. He looked nothing like a spellcaster. His approach was simple. If the beholder's anti-magic field made spellcasting useless, and it also suppressed the beholder's own secondary eyes, then abandon spells and fight in close combat. The armor and saber carried no magic enchantments. Ted had drunk several potions beforehand. His strength, constitution, and agility were each pushed above 20. Think Superman, pulling cars, wrestling bulls, brute force within a fantasy frame. The elder beholder, floating with its eyes closed, twitched an eye stalk. One of its secondary eyes swung toward Ted and detected him while he was invisible from 30 meters away. That level of perception was impressive. The elder opened its central eye. Ted revealed himself in the creature with an intelligence honed by long life and possibly eating English speakers, shouted, "A little mouse dares to come and die." "Ah! You look delicious." Beholders rely on vision so much that their other senses like taste and smell are degenerate. Whether something is delicious to them is mostly an aesthetic judgment. Ted's charm made him appetizing in the elder's eyes. Ted wasted no words. With a gesture and a musical note, a sky-blue barrier bloomed around him. He hefted his 1.5-meter greatsaber and shouted, "You beast! How dare you pose as a god, deceive the people, harm the innocent, and stir trouble? Today I will ensure you have no burial place." The elder eye fired a magic ray with a crack so fast it would be impossible to dodge without preparation. Ted didn't even move. The dark red ray struck the blue barrier and died without making a ripple. The elder was stunned. Ted smiled. "Idiot, prepare to die." Without its magic, the eye demon was, in essence, a grotesque, limbless ball of flesh with only a mouth. Why use magic to fight it? Besides, Ted still had mind power. 438, Eye of Shiva. When the elder eye discovered Ted, the small fry and minions waiting outside, creatures it had subdued and linked to its will, suddenly grew restless. They grabbed weapons and howled, preparing to block the entrance and trap Ted between inside and out. That was the job of these underlings. The elder eye was arrogant and cruel, but it wasn't stupid. It understood that an anti-magic field was a double-edged sword. It had prepared backups, cannon fodder monsters, and spirit. Still, just as the rabble surged to seal the entrance, Hermione appeared. Summoned at her side were Ansu, Cabbage, Chicken Bro, Hog, and a host of other entities whose auras were hardly weaker than the mob's. Grandpa Hog let out a single bloodthirsty howl and charged. Teeth bared, his chain hammer and battle axe threshed through the masses like a ship through waves, spraying gore 3 feet high. His jackalweir underlings, fed by his ferocity, went into a murderous frenzy and followed. Hill giants, goblins, kobolds, none of them could withstand a single blow. Swords sank into flesh, the air filled with the wet, metallic slap of carnage. The Elder Eye had not recruited only low-level grunts. There were real heavy hitters among them, hill giants and trolls, each over 2 meters tall, whose swings created zones of death. Worse, Spirit had catalyzed these beasts for months. Their minds had been warped into fearless killers. Under normal circumstances, many goblins and kobolds would have fled when Hog charged, but now, even as the first dozen were dismembered, the rest surged forward without fear. All they wanted was to fight. From a high platform in the abandoned underground warehouse, Hermione frowned. As expected, this isn't simple. Ansu understood. Ansu unfurled her wings and flew, and a spreading shadow poured across the chamber like a falling curtain. It snuffed torches and bonfires, swallowing the rear ranks. Hermione waved her wand and chanted. A moment later, she blew through the wand, and a sheet of flame erupted, turning into a roaring sea of fire that enveloped most of the cannon fodder. She traced circles above her head with the wand, directing the airflow to form a vortex that made the fire surge. Spirit may be superior to matter for those with strong mind power, but these catalyzed brutes still had flesh and blood. Their outer bodies could not withstand the blaze. Peripheral monsters burst into living fire. Then, driven by the instinct to survive, they stamped toward the center, trampling one another until they collapsed and died. Hermione pulled the wall of flame inward. Screams and the smell of burning flesh filled the space. The fire, nearly touching the ceiling, tightened like a noose. Not all the cannon fodder were consumed. Someone in the darkness fired a hidden bolt. A crossbow bolt with a bluish poisoned head streaked out. A human-sized fireball came from another angle. Both struck an instantaneous silver-white barrier, the spirit version of moon fluid Ted had prepared. The poisoned arrow ricocheted as if off steel and fell to the floor. The fireball was swallowed by the mercury-like substance and annihilated without exploding. The moon fluid could defend against both physical and magical attacks, choose protection modes autonomously, and at critical moments form a protective suit around the skin. Treacherous villain, daring to shoot from the dark. Cabbage, the big white horse, neighed and launched, covering 40 or 50 meters in a single bound. His hoof, bigger than a basin, crushed the goblin crossbowman's skull, snapping his neck. A small, pale skeleton, the size of a meter-tall stick, suddenly materialized behind a kobold geomancer and drove a bone dagger into the back of its head. The Jackalware unit suffered losses, but Grandpa Hog cleaved 3 elites in a row, drenched in blood as he forced a path through the front line. The rear had already been engulfed by fire. Scattered screams continued, but the outcome was decided. Hermione could not see everything in the smoky dark, but the scent of charred flesh made her stomach turn. She had no time for disgust. She was worried about Ted. A dignified wizard in close quarters? Dangerous. The burning chamber was using up oxygen, and she dared not intervene in his fight. Instead, she kept a wind channel at the entrance to refresh the air. While Hermione set the chamber ablaze, Ted was busy at the heart of the warehouse, hacking at a huge eyeball. He struck with all his strength, and sparks flew with a clang. The Elder Eye, an ancient, vicious beholder, had no limbs, but it could twist its mass to evade. Ted's cleaver split its scale-like outer skin, breaking its defense, but it did not bleed. Ted stared at the unbroken core. Damn, this thing's tough. It had reason to be. 200 years old, countless intelligent creatures killed. It had seen everything. Ted's strength was far above average, and his tungsten steel saber was brutally hard. His strike had to be hundreds of kilos of force, yet it hadn't even drawn blood. The beholder, having been slashed and only superficially wounded, managed a rancid smile. It lashed a surge of mind power at Ted, trying to penetrate his mind. Ted smiled back and struck with something subtler, a mind stab. Beholders were not like ordinary humans. If Ted had aimed this at a normal man, his brain would boil and his soul be shredded. Even a mind mage would risk a split personality. The beholder howled in agony. Its single great eye bulged, blood spurted from the corner, its scales slicked red. It wasn't dead, only medium-level mind damage, but it was terrified. "You are a mind mage," it shrieked. Ted merely nodded. Then the tungsten steel saber in his hand began to change, not by alchemy, but by spirit shaping matter. The broad-bladed saber melted into motion. In seconds, it reformed as a spirit-driven chainsaw. "I heard you're tough, huh?" The chainsaw roared, the speed, the bite. Technology, Ted thought, could be as much a weapon as magic. 25,000 revolutions per minute, it tore into the beholder. A few minutes later, Ted emerged from the underground. Thanks to Hermione's Axio, he didn't look like he'd crawled out of a slaughterhouse. He was clean. The spirit chainsaw had reverted into a metal ingot, which he joked he'd have made into a gold brick later, useful for bonking someone on the head. From the beholder, he had retrieved what he needed, a long, thin strip of optic nerve bundle, 2 to 3 millimeters thick and some 15 to 16 centimeters long, the main optic nerve of the Elder Eye. It was the only purple-quality material on the eyeball. The rest, scales, smaller eyes, were only blue or red. With that nerve, his wand core was complete. Now he only needed to set the gem. With the Elder Eye gone, Ted began to consolidate his work in Angola. He chose a few devout local believers and granted them effects, healing, calm, to legitimize the faith behind the ideal land from start to finish. Even his compatriot Li Hao raised an eyebrow. "Should I subscribe?" he joked. In the days that followed, Ted took Hermione on a whistle-stop African tour, riding elephants, chasing rhinos, watching wildebeest migrations, petting cheetahs, fishing for crocodiles, and setting up magic network nodes. They had 4 days of fun. Hermione took dozens of photos and nearly smuggled a leopard home if British law hadn't stopped her. Ted teased her. "No, our place is chaotic enough with meow meow, 3 nifflers, and every stray you adopted. Give the dentist career up and open a zoo." Back in Britain, Hermione spent time with her parents. No one needed to think the two of them had eloped. Ted, however, set off again to fetch a gem, the Eye of Shiva. Shiva, a major Hindu deity, is often associated with a third eye of fire on his forehead that can destroy creation. The Eye of Shiva Ted sought was not a literal god eye, but a priceless magical gem that had once served as a statue's third eye for 1,000 years. At some point, it had been stolen. Accounts varied. Some said in antiquity, others during early British colonial expeditions. A British team that smuggled it out supposedly fell through an ice fissure in the mountains during a blizzard, and the gem ended up buried in Kunlun. Maps left behind and rumors attracted treasure hunters, Indians, Anglo-Indians, rich muggles with fantasies. The promise that such a gem could grant the world was nonsense, of course, but these days fantasies could be monetized. Tens of millions were worth a shot. Ted smoothly joined one of the expedition teams assembled with Indian organizers and Chinese archaeologists. He used his mind power to slip into the group without raising suspicion. The Kunlun area was tricky. Divination couldn't simply point to the ice hole. The maps, or destiny, had to guide them. He kept a low profile, even visiting ancestral sites at Kunlun and avoiding attention from sectarian cultivators. Meanwhile, back home, odd incidents continued to crop up. The British were dropping pretenses. With the magical world more public, strange news filled the papers, and the Ministry of Magic had to deal with it. Lupin handled Muggle-side incidents. Ron, Neville, Harry, and others were each tied up with cases. Ron ran into a particularly troubling one. A young man had been obsessed for years with a mysterious event from his childhood. His sister had died of an illness, and as she faded, the boy swore he'd seen roots from inside a mirror drag her soul away. He ran for help then, but when he returned, she was gone. He never got over it. Years later, a witch in a bar sold him a thumb-sized bottle of golden potion. He drank it, blacked out, and woke up before the mirror world. He'd seen his sister again, as she had been years ago, but she pushed him out. He tried to find the witch again. She had been a Celtic druid herbalist, arrested by the ministry for selling such a potion to a muggle, but the memory never let him go. He searched relentlessly for a way back. At first, Ron was supposed to dissuade him, and failing that, use a memory charm. But the more Ron talked to the man, the more unsettled he became. Something about the man suggested he had slipped into a different world. Ron called for backup. Friends were busy. Ted was away. The young man agreed to wait, but secretly continued his search. And then, impossibly, he found a way. And he actually found it. 439. The Unsolved Mysteries of the Kunlun Mountains. While Ron was having his own problems, the others were hardly idle. Neville, for example, ran into a peculiar group of merpersons while helping a lakeside village drive off monsters. Normally, merpersons don't wear clothes. Only merfolk do. Merfolk resemble humans enough to care about garments. Merpersons look like fish, so why bother? But this group was different. They wore clothes, and the style was bizarre. Neville's first thought was that their outfits looked as if someone had scavenged a Milan fashion show. Strange as it was, it had an odd, unsettling charm. Still, these clothes were definitely not normal. If you wore them down a street on Halloween, people would stare and wonder if something was wrong with your spirit. Their behavior was unusual, too. Merpersons are a wild people, cruel, perhaps not as bloodthirsty as orcs, but utterly merciless to other intelligent races. They tend to attack on sight, then flee if they cannot win. But these merpersons weren't simply smashing doors and slaughtering villagers. They were stealing, secretly rifling through ordinary homes for the most bizarre items. Clothes, curtains, paintings, magazines, strange ornaments, even a cat scratching post. Their caprice drew Neville's curiosity. He followed them in secret, drank a gillywater potion, and cast a bubblehead charm to follow them underwater. Under the lake, there was a cave. The entrance was submerged, but after a short swim, it opened above water into a maze of tunnels and caverns. This terrain didn't make sense. There were no mountains here, no reason for caves to have formed in rich soil. Otherworldly infiltration, Neville thought. He followed the merpersons to their settlement, a village of 70 or 80 merpersons, various sizes and colors, all with looks that could have been cast for a horror film. Their leader, if that's what he was, wore a sequined curtain draped over his shoulders, 2 mismatched slippers, a metal wall ornament on his head, and a necklace of colorful, inexplicable pendants. He leaned on a wooden clothesline pole like it was a scepter. The village walls were plastered with strange carvings, certainly not meaningless, but indecipherable, a kind of abstract art. Stolen murals, magazines, and other oddities were pasted everywhere. There was even a wooden cross. At first glance, it looked like a madman's art exhibition. In the village center, the Murpersons knelt and worshipped a white plastic mannequin from a clothing store, muttering noises Neville could not understand. He almost laughed. Murpersons from another world, and they worship a shop mannequin? Then the mannequin began to glow faintly. The leader gestured with his clothesline pole and tapped the heads of several Murpersons. They suddenly seemed invigorated, as if strengthened. Neville gaped. The plastic mannequin had come to life. The world had changed too much, and he had no idea what to do next. Meanwhile, Harry and Draco Malfoy were dealing with their own problem, one that had its roots 200 years in the past. The Malfoys had once had Muggle relatives, prominent families in their local area. After the Statute of Secrecy drove the Wizarding and Muggle worlds apart, the Malfoys withdrew into seclusion. But times had changed. The Statute of Secrecy was no longer absolute, and in a decade or so, Wizards and Muggles would inevitably draw closer again. The family decided to lay groundwork. Draco, posing as an overseas wanderer returning home, re-established contact with the Muggle families their ancestors had known. He produced tokens, antiques, and a family genealogy, and to the local gentry, a country that still treasured old lineage, this was convincing. The Malfoys distributed favors, accepted invitations, and reappeared in Muggle society. Draco even bought a small villa and pretended to be settling down. On a routine stroll, an excuse to get to know the neighborhood, Harry and Draco soon found themselves visited by descendants of a branch of the Malfoy family that had left the wizarding world 2 centuries ago. The visitors produced matching tokens, antiques, and genealogy. Draco used magic to verify them, and they were genuine. The most astounding detail was that these relatives knew about wizards. Their ancestor had been a squib, hidden away and married into Muggle society. Over generations, the knowledge of magic had been treated like folklore, but now, with monsters appearing in the suburbs by daylight, the old stories were suddenly plausible. They had come begging for help. Their 3-year-old daughter had been abducted by a strange old witch. The visitors were desperate and had sought out the main Malfoy line that had vanished for centuries only to return. An old witch abducted a child? Harry's temper flared. Draco could not refuse. The man was sincere in his gratitude, and Malfoy agreed to help. Yet Draco suspected the man wasn't telling the whole truth. Something was being hidden. Harry worried less about the middle-aged petitioner than about what the old witch might actually be. It did not sound like an ordinary wizard. The child had vanished at the forest edge. Witnesses said a hunched old woman carried her away. That suggested a highly intelligent magical creature, a hag. European folklore is full of forest-dwelling witches who eat children. Many fairy tales paint the witch as villain. In recent years, creatures resembling those tales had indeed begun to appear, hags. They look like ugly old women, but are monsters born of magic. They are vile and cruel, and possess dangerous, often twisted magical abilities. Their potions and spells follow no predictable rules. Hags can distort nature itself. A forest in which a hag dwells will become her ally. They use dream magic to deceive and lure villagers, tempting with wishes, then fulfilling those wishes in perverse ways that make their victims suffer. Hags usually do not hunt actively. They thrive on being asked for help and watching people fall into their traps. If one had taken this child, the question was why? For sustenance, amusement, or some darker bargain? At the same time, Jerry and Sherry faced their own mystery. A few days earlier, Uncle Douglas, a gray-eared tribesman from the Dickamonda subhuman village, had been badly injured while hunting and sent to St. Mungo's for treatment. Yet the next day he returned to the village completely healed and with no memory of being injured or admitted. The villagers first blamed a potion's side effects, but when Jerry came back and things seemed wrong, he contacted St. Mungo's. 2 hours later, the hospital replied, "Mr. Douglas's injuries are stable, and he will be discharged and return home in 3 days at most." Jerry was stunned. 3 days? Uncle Douglas was still in St. Mungo's? Then who in the village was this Uncle Douglas? Jerry and Sherry apparated via the flu to St. Mungo's and found a Mr. Douglas in a hospital bed who, upon hearing there was another Douglas in his village, was flabbergasted. He grabbed his crutch and demanded to go home. His wife was waiting, and he was not about to let an imposter take advantage. The two Douglases were taken back to the village, where the entire community watched them confront one another. This was serious. One of them had to be false. And Ted had been in the Kunlun Mountains for 2 days and 2 nights. Ice and snow everywhere. The team slogged on, following a marked route on an old map. Following the previous expedition's trail, they expected to find where the last team had met disaster, and with it, treasure. Ted noticed 2 other teams within a dozen miles. They might be tracking his party, or they might have similar maps. Everyone was after the same prize. After 2 days in the frozen wilderness, strange phenomena began to occur. Distant noises and fires at midnight, dark shadows flickering over ridgelines. During a night watch, a young man went to relieve himself and was called by a mysterious voice. If Ted hadn't hauled him back, he might have been lost. These people were no longer ordinary explorers. They had decades of archaeology and strange encounters behind them, yet now they slept with guns clutched tight, terrified. Then they met magical creatures, Yetis. Over 3 meters tall, white-furred and gorilla-like, with disproportionately large feet, they were deceptively nimble on the snow. The security men opened fire, but conventional firearms did little. Although they drew blood, the bullets only enraged the Yetis. The dozen or so members of the expedition were chased to the edge of a crevasse with no apparent escape. Ted acted silently. He opened a teammate's backpack and let some small cakes fall. The Yetis stopped to sniff and eat them. Seizing the moment, the group used ropes to slide into a huge ice crevice dozens of meters deep and escape the pursuers. Exhausted, they pressed on along the crevice, wary of further attacks. 20 minutes later, Old Who, one of the security men, spotted a metal button frozen in the ice. A copper button embossed with a crest. It was not modern. A European archaeology expert on the team identified the style as more than 300 years old, affordable only to wealthy, established families. The woman organizing the expedition examined it and read the crest aloud. The Billiter family, the captain of the missing expedition's family. Could the old team have passed through this crevice? The discovery electrified the group. They quickened their pace. Under Ted's quiet guidance, the party encountered will-o'-the-wisp beetles and packs of demon wolves. They defeated a number of snow yetis that had become parasitic on corpses and finally realized with horror that the corpses were the members of the expedition from 300 years ago. The treasure was within reach. Their findings matched the old expedition's diary. The team had deviated from their planned route, forced guides at gunpoint to take a shortcut into a forbidden dead zone, and been picked off by monsters one after another. They had died here, buried alongside a cache of plundered treasures from India. The modern team persevered for almost a week, defeating several magical beasts and reaching the treasure deep in an ice cave. Then the 2 other teams caught up. They had suffered heavy losses. Tensions exploded. Prepared for conflict, the trailing teams opened fire. A brutal firefight erupted with bullets flying in every direction. Under a streak of unlucky coincidence, Ted's team managed to escape with only a few items. The other 2 parties fared worse. The ice cave collapsed, and they escaped with only a handful of choices, one of them the Eye of Shiva, the very artifact their employer had requested. Ted safely escorted his people back to a nearby town, then slipped away into the cold without fanfare. Half an hour later, a teammate realized, "Hey, where did that person go?" "Who?" "You know, the fellow, our young smiling guy. Fatty said he saved him." There was a confused hush. They checked group photos and counted heads. One person was missing, but no one could say who. Ted's presence had been so quiet, his interventions so subtle, that after the dust settled, the expedition could not even remember him clearly. They had escaped with the treasure and lost much, but one mystery remained unsolved. Someone had been there the whole time, and then vanished. For those who survived, this adventure would become another unsolved mystery swallowed by the Kunlun Mountains. It's gone. It's gone. Chapter 420. Poof. Gone. Although the protagonist's team still had an unsolved mystery, one of their companions had vanished after a week spent together, the main mission had been accomplished. Most of the treasure lay buried beneath the ice fissures of the snowfield, but a few smaller, famous items had been retrieved. Unfortunately, the Eye of Shiva was missing. The expedition's financial backer was the Sunak family, wealthy British citizens of Indian descent, with generations of influence in Mughal Britain. The current patriarch believed the rumor that possessing the Eye of Shiva would grant you the world. He intended to use it to become prime minister and overturn everything in his favor. His subordinates gleefully brought him the ceramic bottle containing the gem. Sunak was in his 40s, short and rather round, his hairline not yet giving in, perhaps because he'd emigrated to Britain as an adult. He took the bottle, painted with an image of Shiva burning the god of love, cradled it like a relic, and trembled with excitement. Tears gathered as he pressed the bottle to his chest and mouthed a prayer. May Brahma protect us. May my ancestors look down and see the Sunak family finally rise to power. He pried open the stopper and shook the bottle. An olive-shaped gem slipped out, about 2 centimeters long, its surface a riot of natural facets. The overall hue was purple, but at its core a deep red flickered as if a tiny flame burned within. The gem drew everyone's eyes. It seemed to hold an impossible vision that pulled them in. Sunak's hands shook. He was terrified of breaking it, terrified of losing it. He pointed to an ancient painting behind bulletproof glass on the living room wall, an old Indian depiction of Shiva. In the painting, at the center of Shiva's forehead, rested a gem identical to the one he held. Then, right before everyone's eyes, the gem rose slowly from his palm, floated in the air, flashed, and vanished. For a stunned 3 to 5 seconds, no one moved. Then old Sunak gave a sound like a soul being torn, an agonized scream that echoed with grief and disbelief. He clutched his heart and collapsed. Overcome by the extremes of joy and despair, he died on the spot. His 17-year-old son inherited the family's affairs. Standing in that living room that had witnessed the impossible, the boy privately vowed to fulfill his father's last wish, to seize power and become prime minister. Ted, of course, didn't know that by swapping and taking the Eye of Shiva, he had indirectly caused a death somewhere else. He was busy forging a wand, still in Iceland. With celestial bodies converging and the other world bleeding through, the world itself reacted. Not with a will or purpose, but as a system responding to foreign influences. Small places suffered earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, freak cold snaps. Most of these were like pimples on a living organism, locally devastating, globally insignificant. Iceland was different. A ley-line magic nexus had been born there, a continental-scale node. There were fewer than 3 of those in all of Europe. This new node was so powerful that, unchecked, it could have torn the country apart. When Ted had fashioned the mind ring, he'd consumed a major portion of its accumulated magic. Otherwise, even more drastic evacuation and destruction would have been necessary. Now, he was drawing upon what remained. Making a wand in a newly formed nexus was the obvious thing to do. He was saving people and crafting a tool at the same time. Descending several kilometers underground, Ted found the magical fauna had become more numerous and more formidable. In this magic-rich environment, creatures had adapted, creating a small, self-sustaining ecosystem. The presence of an outsider like him set the inhabitants on edge. Protected by a friendly charm and being a mind mage himself, Ted wasn't attacked outright, but he was watched intently. At the lava layer, he even found native fire element life, truly born of the magma. If fire elements existed, perhaps water elements and others were forming elsewhere in the deep trenches. Now wasn't the time for speculation. The wand needed finishing. Ted located the alchemical array he'd used when he made the ring. It had been occupied by a lava element. He drove it off and reclaimed the array, intending to refine it properly this time. If he was going to use the Ring of Mind Domination again, it deserved a proper forge. Setting up the array took 2.5 hours. A flat black rock, about 20 square meters, floated on the lava with naturally etched alchemical sigils. 7 stone pillars around it bore different rune words. He began. First, he refined the Black Forest Spirit's horn, reshaping it. The array drew fire element magic from the lava into a red beam that enveloped the antler and started to reshape it to the form in Ted's mind. Magic surged and folded through the material. Above ground, Iceland's sky turned hostile. In late June, it began snowing and hailing while lightning churned within the clouds. Meteorologists were baffled. Nothing in classical meteorology could explain such a sudden, wild storm. For Ted, the display was only an external symptom. The real trial was underground. Powerful monsters, drawn by the surging, ownerless magic, were stirring. These were huge, level 10-plus creatures that usually lived tens of kilometers apart. Now they converged. Eyeless blind serpents, two-headed, steel-boned tyrannosaurs, infernal salamanders in the lava, giant brain-feeding shadow bats, and the lava element Ted had driven away. He had anticipated turmoil, and his defenses were ready. His summoned creatures and dense magical wards were on alert. Ted's current inability to move freely or use mind power didn't affect his artifact cards. Those were still usable, and they could hold their own. 8 hours later, the wand was finished. It used the antler of an otherworld nascent nature spirit, the Black Forest spirit, purple, as the wand's shaft. The core was a main optic nerve bundle from an elder beholder, purple. Internal magic flow was joined with refined liquid mithril. It had been made within the newly formed Continental Magic Nexus. 12 inches long, hard but with some flexibility, the wand was not perfectly straight but had a natural, elegant curve. It was set with an epic-grade purple-quality gem, the Eye of Shiva, and inscribed with the rune word Destruction. Wand of Destruction, orange quality, +4 intelligence, +4 perception, +4 spirit, +4 all attributes, +2 spell levels, +3 magic penetration, +20% magic power, 5% chance to deal double damage when casting damaging spells. Comes with level 7 disintegration, destroys magical items, areas, and effects of orange quality or lower. Comes with level 8 disintegration, turns target to dust on hit. Comes with level 9 ray of destruction, completely annihilates a living being or an item, immune to resurrection, time reversal, or other recovery methods. Ted felt his wand might be able to contend with the Elder Wand itself. Its effects were unapologetically focused on destructive power. He also reviewed the Ring of Mind Domination he'd made earlier. Ring of Mind Domination, orange quality, +3 intelligence, +5 perception, +7 spirit, 3 mind power levels. Psionic Burst greatly amplifies total psionic energy for a short period. Psionic Domination greatly enhances the quality of psionic energy for a short period. Psionic Penetration consumes psionic energy to forcibly breach an opponent's mental defenses, may cause irreversible mental damage. Mind over Matter expends vast psionic energy to warp reality, indestructible. On July 1st, a talent triggered. Ted felt a small jolt of insight. Otherworld knowledge, Gold had activated, and he'd discovered the Rune Scroll of Rise, the Rune Mage, the Rune Scroll of Rise, the Rune Mage, orange. For 1,000 years, the great mage Rise traveled the world, collecting ancient magic runes and preserving them in his rune scroll. Unfortunately, rune magic's terrors have been forgotten. Requires 12,600 experience points to redeem. Ted blinked. Orange quality otherworld knowledge, 12,600 experience points, was a hefty cost, but the reward was extraordinary. Rise's rune scroll alone could be a game changer. Redeem it, he told himself. It was only 12,000 experience, about 10 days' worth, and the scroll's secrets were worth it. He set down the wand and ring and devoted himself to studying the runes. As he did, far away in Diagon Alley, a strange tremor ran through the air. Wizards and shopkeepers felt unusual magical fluctuations and spilled into the street to look up. Magic in the sky seemed to spark and crackle, churning and boiling as if the air itself were a cauldron. Magical pets in the shops shrieked and fluttered. The scene resembled the uneasy behavior animals show before an earthquake. Thankfully, the phenomenon lasted only about 10 minutes and then faded. Aurors who arrived later missed it entirely. People on the street whispered anxiously. "What was that?" "Nothing like this has happened in months," someone said. "More odd things in the last few months than in my whole life before." Gossip began to spread. Someone's old schoolmate, Old Jack, had gotten married at nearly 60 after saving some kind of nature spirit that had returned his kindness. "It's not an elf," people argued. "It's a nature spirit, an evolved magical being." The crowd debated the details, laughed about matchmaking, and returned to their days. Wizards seemed more ready to accept upheaval than muggles. Strange happenings, unsettled lives. These were merely part of living in a world where magic thrummed more loudly than usual. Ted felt and thought bigger. With the Ring of Mind Domination, the Wand of Destruction, and rudimentary mastery of rune magic, he felt ready to claim his place on the edge of legend. Snape and the like aren't a match for me, he mused. He wouldn't dare compare himself to the truly legendary Dumbledore, Voldemort, Grindelwald. Those names were beyond ordinary reckoning. But compared to someone still straddling the threshold, Ted felt confident. Besides, what did Snape have besides a wand? A hair product? Problem solved. When Ted returned to meet his companions, the five of them regarded one another in embarrassed silence, each thinking the others had somehow gone through something monumental and had come back different. Hermione watched the boys sitting before a plate of ice cream, staring at it as if at a relic, then asked, puzzled, "What's wrong with you lot?" "Ron, if you're not going to eat it, I will," she warned. "Who said I'm not eating?" Ron grabbed a giant scoop and winced as the cold bit his teeth. Jerry saw his friends had stopped pretending and that if he didn't start eating now, the ice cream would be gone, so he scooped some too. The awkwardness eased as everyone dug in. Hermione prodded, curious. "So what on earth happened to you all?" "Ah, don't even mention it. It's upsetting," Harry said, leaning back and half clutching his head as if he wanted to say more but couldn't. Ron leaned in, whispering, "Harry, you not going to eat that? I'll have it if you won't." Harry glared. "Do you want me to sock at you?" "No," Hermione turned to Neville. "What about you?" Neville hesitated, looking like it was hard to explain. Ron, growing impatient at the high-drama mood, cut in. "Fine, let me go first then. I'll go first, okay?" Neville stammered, then blurted, face flushed but eyes bright. I saw my great-grandmother."